Live. My name is John Wilkinson. Welcome to another edition of the Council of Google Plus. I am broadcasting live here in 10 Washington State, and we have a full house tonight, I think. Looks like we got Matt Yester, Joshua Gwynn, Chris Harris, and of course, we are very privileged to have Matt Slick. Like we have a couple of guys who we enjoy having. We have Ocean and Holistic Nihilist.
Okay.
Or I have no idea.
I was trying to.
So anyway,
I was trying to get to what Joe's argument was, and a lot of times we can speak past each other. I'm trying to hear him, and but I think I figured out what's going on, and wouldn't mind talking to him about it. But
I can explain Joe's argument.
Go ahead.
So the Euthyphro dilemma, well, if you want, we can cover the naturalistic fallacy first.
Naturalistic fallacy.
Okay, so that was a term coined by a philosopher who came out with the open question argument named G.E. Moore. And the open question argument is about the reduction of the good to some naturalistic properties, right? Now, these can be just descriptive properties. You can consider them non-normative properties as opposed to normative properties if you don't like the criterion of naturalistic properties, right? But the idea is that the argument goes, it's a modus tollens. It says, if the good is reducible to X, then whether X is good is a closed question. X is good is not a closed question. Therefore, X is not reducible to the good. So the idea behind that is if you say that, let's just say the happiness, health, and well-being of people is good, it's still a meaningful question to ask, is the happiness, health, and well-being of humans good, right? Now, if you say that it's, not, for example, if you say that's just what the good means, then that's a meaningless question because it's saying something like, is happiness, health, and well-being happiness, health, and well-being?
Right. It's tautologist. Let me ask you this then. Would you say that naturalistic fallacy is, what are you smoking there? I got a little fake cigar here. I like my little.
It's just this.
Hey, Matt Slick.
There you go.
Let's bring out my pipe.
Okay.
Hey, man, I just wanted
to
say hi to Matt, actually. I've never seen him on a chat before.
Hey, man, how you doing?
Hey, I'm good.
You're good, huh?
Karm a lot.
He's not as
joke
cool
was
in real
being
life. That was funny, man. I like that.
Liberty, can you sign my G Plus account? Thank you.
Okay. No, would someone say I'm taller in real life? Is that what it is from sitting here? Well, hey, man, nice meeting you, buddy.
Yeah, man, I really like Karm. I think it was this year I was gonna start supporting you guys per month, but finances went out the roof. So
Don't worry about it, man. God, don't worry about that. Just use the site. That's what it's there for.
yeah, cool.
All right. Okay, let me get back into what we're talking about here. Naturalistic is fallacious.
Right.
I'm trying to word it a different way so we can understand it better, even though it's a little bit simplistic. It's fallacious to explain that which is good based on properties.
No, it's not based on properties. It's non-normative properties. So like anything that's descriptive, the idea is that there's a difference between prescriptive and descriptive, right?
What do you mean by non-normative?
Non-normative, I mean something that's descriptive.
So it's just by describing it.
Yeah. So there's the distinction between normative and non-normative is something like normative is a standard with respect to which one can be in or out of accord, right? And then non-normative is something that's just descriptive. It's just the way things are, right?
Okay. So he's saying then this is the way things are. He's saying that it's fallacious to explain what is good based on saying it's just the way things are.
Right. So the idea literally about the is-ought problem, right? That really only has to do with a formal kind of syllogism The idea is that in formal logic, you're always going to have some invalid inference whenever you have some unclear type of, like, the type of proposition is not going to follow. So it's always going to be a non sequitur. If I had a bunch of descriptive premises and then a normative premise, right, then I'm always going to have a non sequitur unless I build normative premises into my argument. So, for example, let's say you shouldn't. The premise one is you shouldn't kill things that are innocent. Babies are innocent, therefore you shouldn't kill babies because they're innocent, right? But if I just had something like babies are under the age of consent, right? And then just more non-normative properties, such as like killing things that can't consent is murder, things like that. I'm never going to be able to derive from that I shouldn't kill babies, right? It's because of the inclusion of the normative premise that's going to get us to the normative conclusion. So the idea is that saying that God commands this, right? That's not going to say, well, why should we listen to God's commands, right? So if you had an argument, say, God commands this, premise 2 is we should listen to God's commands, and then the conclusion is...
All right. So basically, it's just saying that we can know what we ought to do by how things are. It's a simplistic thing. God is this way. That's how we know. And that's a fallacy.
Yeah, right. It's deriving a different type of proposition. Okay.
So then, can good truly be known? If it's fallacious to infer God as a necessary precondition, if you exclude God from any argument, the is-ought problem, from my understand, is insoluble. So therefore, good can't be known. It's a moot issue.
Well, it's not as if it can't be known.
How would you know if you don't have a standard by which you can know?
Well, the question for moral epistemology is different, right? As to whether or not something follows logically. That's different, right? Suppose I don't know how one can know what the good is, right? Suppose that's true that I don't know. It doesn't follow from that the structure of the argument is therefore valid, right? So the problem is that if you have just descriptive premises, then you're never going to get to a non-descriptive premise. You're only going to get descriptive premises, or you're only going to get descriptive conclusions. So if I were to say something like, well, how do you know some normative proposition is true? That's a different question, right? Maybe I don't know. But that's going to be irrelevant. Whether I know is going to be irrelevant.
So how can they know what is good? By nature.
Well, it doesn't. None of that is relevant. How one knows more. The moral epistemology is going to be irrelevant in this context.
No,
right?
I know, but so would you agree with me that it is always wrong for anyone to torture babies to death merely for their personal pleasure?
No, we've had.
I know. Would you agree though? Yes or no?
No, I don't agree that it's always wrong.
So then, if it's not always wrong, then there's cases when it's morally correct.
No, that's a non sequitur.
Well, a statement's either true or false.
Yeah, a statement is either true or false. That's the principle of bivalence. But saying that something is morally correct or morally incorrect is not true. You can say it's not the case that something is morally correct is not the same proposition as it is the case that something is morally incorrect.
Would you be saying then that the statement that I offered about the baby torture thing, because there's a moral value woven into it and the moral value is unknowable, that therefore the statement can't be either known to be true or false?
Well, listen, I'll put it this way. Let's just use something that's non-moral so I can give you the intuition with what I'm talking about how what you said was a non sequitur.
Bullying a strike, moral or not moral?
Well, let me just talk. We'll talk about like boiling a pot of water, right?
Okay.
Now let's say if you say you ought to boil the pot of water.
Excuse me. Keep talking. I'm going to put you on mute. I need to use the restroom. I'll continue to hear you. No disrespect, man, but I got to use the restroom now. Keep going. I'll hear you.
Right. So if I say
you gotta go.
Now, what I take something to be morally impermissible to mean is that you ought not do that. That's what morally impermissible means. is that you ought not do this thing. You should not do it. And so I take that to be synonymous with something like morally incorrect, right? It's the case that you ought not do that. Now, if I say that you ought to boil the water and someone negates that, someone says, no, that's not true, it doesn't follow that they're saying you ought not boiling the water. They're just saying something like, it is not the case that you ought to boil the water, right? But it doesn't follow from the fact that it is not the case that you ought to boil the water, that you ought not boil the water. It might be okay for you to boil the water. It might be okay for you to not boil the water. There might be no prescriptive action that you need to take with respect to boiling water. So that's why saying something is either morally correct or morally incorrect is that's actually a false dichotomy. That there's an option, right? The third option is that it's neither morally incorrect nor incorrect.
Well, it depends on the ends that you're fulfilling there.
That's what I was gonna. Yeah, you beat me to it.
Yep.
Yeah, I was gonna say morality deals with intention. So if I were, what's your name again? Realistic. If I were to slap you, we've probably gone over this. If I were to slap you, what's the reason? It would make it good or bad. To protect you, that's okay. I don't like your glasses because the rectangles are not the right proportion, so I slap you for that. That's not necessarily a good thing. But from your perspective, it doesn't even apply. From what I understand, it's not really morally right or wrong. It's just whatever.
Well, I wasn't addressing whether or not I haven't taken a position on whether something is morally right or wrong. I'm just saying that in the context that you're talking about, I say if something is morally correct and someone says, no, that's not true, it doesn't follow from that they're saying it's morally incorrect. That's what I mean.
Yeah, but there's no way to know moral fidelity by which you can have a standard so you can judge what is morally right or wrong. What then only oughts can only occur if we have a standard.
Well, I agree that oughts are related to standards. I agree with that.
So without a standard, we have no oughts.
Right, but I don't think there's a correct or incorrect standard to have. I think there are standards, but I don't think there are correct or incorrect standards.
I think at this point, your brain and my brain are just insufficient. We're humans. We're not sufficient to be able to do. I'm going to try that. We're not sufficient to be able to get to that. I'm not insulting you. I'm not insulting me. It's just, hey, we're human beings. We don't have infinite knowledge and rational ability. And so I look at, and this is probably, I'm more of a philosophical, I'm a bit of a pragmatist, even intellectually and morally, because I've argued with so many people for so many years over so many things that I've seen how, which circle am I going to step into and how long are we going to go in circles and not get anywhere? And to me, that's just a waste of time, because we can argue philosophically about things. Well, we don't get anywhere. And so it's like saying truth that has no value is not truth. And value can have different meanings, moral truth or absolute value truth or whatever, propositional truth, descriptive. And so what I've learned over the years is we can make sense of things if we can, as simplistic as this sounds, we can make sense of things by presupposing certain things. Like, for example, I don't believe in the macro theory of evolution. I have no problem with microevolution. We look at the fossil record and you presuppose macroevolution. Well, some of the evidence could be used to support that by presupposing the validity of a certain assumption. And then does the evidence suffice? Well, to a degree, yes. We have other issues, but that's just something we could talk about. In that it's done in science as well, where an unknown is presupposed. Does the evidence support the assumption? And then generally speaking, when you do that, things either fall apart or they don't. The same kind of principle, I think, cuts to the chase here, excuse me, with the issue of knowledge, with the issue of rationality, with the issue of morality. We presuppose God exists. Everything makes sense at that point. We can then bridge the is-ought gap. We can explain rationality. We can do all these things, where the other perspective, you can't. And that's why I was saying with the naturalistic fallacy, you can't know if anything is ever good or not, and you'd have no standard, so therefore the whole discussion is moot.
Well, I was just I don't think that anything you said there was true, right? I don't think positing God solves a bunch of philosophical problems. Let alone all philosophical problems. I don't see how positing a God would do that. Nevertheless,
I didn't say all. Well, maybe I did, but if I did, let me retract that with quotes. But let me just say that the issue of rationality, our existence, morality, the three major areas of epistemological discussion, of knowledge, of everything. You presuppose God's existence, it all makes sense. Now, some people might say, Matt, you're just being way too simplistic. You're not dealing with the real issues. Well, yeah, why not? It
Well,
does make sense.
Well, let's say for example, you talk about the way God accounts for the laws of logic. This is something that you said in the previous hangout.
Right.
And I don't understand this, because any attempt to justify the laws of logic is not going to presuppose God, but it'll presuppose the laws of logic. So any attempt to justify the laws of logic is going to presuppose the very thing to be justified and therefore not account for it, right? That'll be to argue in a circle. So I don't think that God accounts for the laws of logic. I think the laws of logic are themselves unaccounted for. They're what we might call self-evident truths.
A self-evident truth presupposes the law of identity and non-contradiction.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. The law of identity and the law of non-contradiction and the law of excluded middle, those are just true. That's just the way the world is, right? There's no
tautologist.
Justify, right? I agree. There's no way to justify those claims, because any attempt to justify those claims is going to presuppose the truth of those claims. So not only does God not account for the laws of logic, it's not the case that anything accounts for the laws of logic.
Yeah, I would say that that's incorrect, and that the laws of logic are conceptualizations or abstractions or universals and things like that. Those are qualities, so they're going to have an essence, because properties emanate out of the essence. So if we can look at the properties, we can determine the essence. And it seems to be fair to say that these abstractions, these things are abstractions, and abstractions require minds. I know in philosophy, sometimes they'll use the terms in slightly different ways, but they are of the mind, a process of the mind based on the issue of the mind. And if the laws of logic themselves are not by nature mindful or of the mind, then we have a problem bridging the gap between that which is not of the mind and the logical process of the mind. And how would that work? And that's a problem there. And we could, just by asking the question, we get even further into the problematic area. If we presuppose that God exists, then the laws of logic can be accounted for instead of just saying they just are. Because, I'll be done after this, if you were to say the laws of logic just are, and that's valid, then I could say then God just is, and that's valid, just the same, and it would work.
The thing about question-begging arguments is that if they're addressed to a skeptic of the question-begging argument, right, then that's when it's going to beg the question. If you accept the premises, then the premises are going to justify the conclusion. The point is that all arguments, if you read something about, if you read anything about fallacies of vacuity and you read about like question begging arguments, you'll realize that every single argument begs the question in some context, right? So that's not going to be the point. If you doubt the laws of logic, if you were to come to me and say, I doubt that there exist the laws of logic, right? Apart from, I couldn't offer you anything that wouldn't already presuppose the laws of logic, so you would be able to accuse me of begging the question against you, right?
I don't have any problem with people begging the question in certain areas.
Right. Well, neither
have to.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. I don't have a problem insofar as something like the laws of logic are concerned. If someone says, well, it's just self-evident that the laws of logic exist, then I'm perfectly willing to accept that. But if someone says that about God, I'm not going to accept that. I'm going to charge that person with begging the question.
But you're begging the question too. You're being inconsistent.
I'm not being inconsistent by begging the questions with respect to the laws of logic. I'm only begging the question to the person who doesn't accept the laws of logic, right?
You're begging the question by accepting the laws of logic by speaking and identifying any verb, any noun, laws, etc. You're presupposing the first law.
Well, look, again, if you were to doubt the laws of logic, I would concede that I can't justify them.
Same here.
Right, and so, but that's not the case. If with God, if I were to say what justifies God exists, your response wouldn't be, I can't justify the claim that God exists, right? Otherwise, I would have no reason as a skeptic to accept that God exists.
Well, I disagree with you. I think there are ways to demonstrate that God is a necessary, he's necessarily existent, because if we only have two things to account for something, say in a true dichotomy, God or not the case of God, true dichotomy. We have worldviews that derive out of those two mutually exclusive descriptions. So if we were to have one that's negated and can't be true, then the other one by necessity is validated. And I think it's called the impossibility of the contrary. And I think it's a valid way of demonstrating God's existence.
You want to say that you want to form a syllogism. I think the syllogism that you would form is going to beg the question in an instance of a true dichotomy of the form P or not P, right?
Yeah, I understand. Alex went and tried to go through that, but it's not representing the argument that I was presenting accurately. It took me a while to understand what he was saying and how he was saying, but that's the issue.
So what's the argument that you're forwarding? How does it go?
Trying to get my notes from that. I was actually trying to find them because we're heading that direction. I can't find them because I took some time out and thought about it, and because it's not fresh in my mind, I don't want to get too far into it because it's not fresh in my mind. I don't want to misrepresent him from what he was saying and how he was saying it. No, I am trying to find my notes. I've got them. I just found them a few days ago, and then I lost them again. So I have thousands of files on my computer. But
As do we all.
I got tons. I got tons. I'll find it sometime. I'll go over it again because I'm gonna have to, oh, wait a minute.
You started a dossier on me and then promptly forgot about me.
I found them. Sorry, I found the notes. If God exists in his, which part of it is his? I rearrange a lot of stuff. If God exists, then his mind is a necessary foundation for the laws of logic. If P, then no, that's not what he was saying.
There are two things. If you want to go over divine conceptualism, I can tailor some arguments specifically to divine conceptualism, but I also think that conceptualism is untrue itself, so there wouldn't be any non-theistic alternatives.
I think it's what Alex was trying to say here. Either P or not P, therefore P.
Yeah, that's going to be a question-begging argument.
Right, and you know, I'm going to say this. It's been a while since I've looked at this because this kind of argument is not something you just on the top of your head, unless you're really studied through it, which I'm not. So I'm not trying and not get into the argument. It's just that I'm gonna have to go over it again. I do have notes, and one thing that I did come out of this when I was examining some stuff is let me run this by you. As a matter of fact, it might see what you think of this. Because I do want to go over the issue with Alex, and I do have a response, but I'm going to write it up. But nevertheless, here's something I was looking at. If you look in the text, either the transcendent nature of theism, God, or the non-transcendent nature of atheism, not God, accounts, and what I mean by that is provides a necessary precondition for the laws of logic.
Yeah, I think that's a false dichotomy as well.
Why? God or not God? How's it a false dichotomy?
Because it might be the case that there is no account for the necessary preconditions of laws of logic. So that I would say that's the same thing as when Alex Malpass spoke with you, that's the same thing as the toast or not toast.
That was it. Yeah, the not toast is a misrepresentation of the argument. Then you said there is no account necessary.
Yeah, I'm saying if I don't accept the dichotomy that either the transcendent nature of God or whatever the nature of atheism is, non-transcendent or not, accounts for the laws of logic.
So you would say I
might say there is no account for the laws of logic, right? So that would show that the dichotomy is false.
There is no need or no ability or no way to account.
Right, there is no account of the laws of logic.
There is no account
for
the laws of logic.
They just don't. That's weird.
Which I would ask, how would you know that to be the case?
Well, I would just say that anything that is purported to account for it is just going to presuppose the laws of logic. So, I mean, there are two ways in which we can mean account, right? We can talk about epistemically justifying the belief. That's an account, right? Or we can talk about providing like the ontological foundations. Now, assume that like nominalism might be true. If nominalism is true, then logic doesn't have ontology, right? Like logic is just a useful fiction, right? There is no grounding of logic. It's just the way things are if nominalism is true. If conceptualism is true, the things that ground the laws of logic are things like minds. If Platonism is true, then abstract objects exist independently of minds and everything else, and that laws of logic gain its truth or get its truth in virtue of these Platonic truth makers. So there are three standard conceptions, right? And I for one don't accept nominalism because I think there are some problems. I don't accept conceptualism, neither divine or otherwise. And I lean towards some sort of negative account of Platonism, like a non-robust account of Platonism. But the point is that what I'm saying is that that dichotomy that you offered, that's going to beg the question against the nominalist, right? Because the nominalist isn't going to accept the premise that either God accounts for the laws of logic or whatever not God accounts for the laws of logic. They're going to say there is no account for the laws of logic. There is no ontological grounding. And if that is talking about an epistemological account, right, as to what justifies the belief in the laws of logic, if that's what that's talking about, then no one should accept that dichotomy, right? Because that's going to beg the question in all contexts, right? In any context that's brought up, if you deny the laws of logic, right, then you're not going to be able to justify them without assuming them to be true already. So I might as well just say, I could just put God in place of anything in your syllogism, and it would hold value, because the thing that's going to ultimately justify the laws of logic is the presumption of the laws of logic, right? Which is going to be circular.
Right. I'm taking notes of what you're saying. This is exactly the kind of stuff I love to get into, to hear these kinds of things. I think there's flaws in it. I'm just taking notes of what you're saying. Yeah, the nominalist would say there is no accounting for the laws of logic. But that's an assumption. That's because he's presupposing nominalism, but he can't prove nominalism is true without using the laws of logic. So basically, people are entering into these worldviews without justification.
That's the same thing about conceptualism or Platonism. You can't.
Then it's arbitrary.
You can't prove that they're true without assuming the laws of logic. That's going to be that's just going to be what the nature of proof is, right? The nature of proof is using logical laws to establish conclusions.
What's the ontology of the laws of logic? That's the issue. It's when you get to this crux, when you're saying the ultimate grounding is either the laws of logic, and the laws of logic authorize themselves, then you got to get into the nature of logic. What is it?
Right. Well,
ipso facto, it's just these abstractions just exist and they're absolute, invariant.
Well, I can give you. There are three ways, right? That I've offered, right? I've said the nominalist is going to reject that logic has ontology. They're going to say, just like the nominalist is going to reject mathematical objects, they're going to say there's no abstract two-ness out there that makes things two or not. It's just the case that 2 + 2 = 4. There is no abstract object of 2 and another abstract object of 2 that makes.
Abstract object is a concept.
No.
That's what they are. The concept.
On the Platonic view, abstract objects have ontology.
Well, I'm not talking about Platonism.
But nominalism.
Right. Well, on nominalism, they have no ontology. They're not the concepts. They're the content of the concepts, right? And the content of the concepts has no ontology to the nominalist.
Well, they refer. Well, really, they'd say in and of itself, it doesn't have to have some reference outside of itself that you call these two materialistic things 2 or 4.
Sorry, what's the relevance of materialism?
Just in as far as if they have no ontology themselves, it's got to be referential in something else external to what you're talking about, such as material objects. I just brought that up as an example. Whether you have 2 things, 4 things, 5 things, 10,
Well, if you just watch, I mean, this isn't even a particularly theistic or non-theistic view, right? Like I could, if I could just put a video in the sign chat of William Lane Craig talking about how there is nothing in virtue of which mathematical truths are true. Similarly, there's nothing in virtue of which logical truths are truths. They don't have truth makers on a nominalist view. William Lane Craig is a nominalist. Right now, the conceptualist wants to say that logic is true in virtue of conceptual objects, that is to say, mental objects. Now, I can address problems with that view if you'd like me to. I would say that I think conceptualism is false, and that's because there's a difference between the mental state and the content of the mental state. Now, that's a general argument against conceptualism. I can argue against divine conceptualism specifically as being something like some sort of logical Euthyphro. I could offer a logical Euthyphro dilemma.
Well, who defines two?
I don't think two is defined really. It's like
numbers aren't. Okay.
Well, you can have a definition of what, but I'm saying the ontologies of things are not defined. You don't by fiat.
Is it a concept?
Yeah, but you don't fiat things into existence. If things have ontology, then it's not in virtue of them being defined that they have ontology, right? It's in virtue of their properties, of existence, whatever.
Yeah. Are they concepts?
Yeah.
They are?
The number two is a concept. I have a concept of the number two, yeah.
Okay. How do you know that?
Well, I take my beliefs to be self-known. It's true in virtue. I believe it.
Oh, you define number two. Okay.
No, I didn't say I defined the number two. When I said
self. Oh, okay. You didn't mean self. Okay. What do you mean by self?
Well, when I say beliefs, my mental states are self-known. I'm saying what it means to know the mental state is to have the mental state. So when I say I have this belief,
how do you know it is apart from mental state?
Well, I'm saying, well, I can offer a negative account of Platonism if that's what you wanted me to do.
Well, that's what you brought up. Is the main thing I'm talking about here is just you already affirmed it's a concept. I'm just pressing you on it. You said, well, I asked you, how did you know that? Or how did you ascertain that knowledge? You said, well, it's just self-evident to you. So it's dependent upon yourself.
Well, I'm saying I have a concept of,
I know you have a concept of it. I'm not denying that. That wasn't my assertion. That was your answer you gave me for the justification for the basis of its ontology.
No, I don't think it's a concept.
What's the basis for its ontology?
I mean, I could go either way. I don't really have a firm position, but I would say there's an abstract. I would say that there's an abstract.
Do you have a position? Okay, so you don't have a firm position on it.
On the ontology.
Press this point, arguing against it, but you yourself don't have a firm position on it.
Right, and I say if anybody has a firm position on the ontology of logic, that's fine. They can offer an argument, right?
Yeah.
I don't have a burden to meet when I say I don't have a firm position on the ontology of logic. If I were to say I lean towards Platonism, someone could ask me why I lean towards Platonism, and I would offer things like the indispensability argument, right? The indispensability argument is a good argument to believe that Platonism is true, but there's also some problems with that, and so I don't have a position on that.
How's there any correlation between abstract thought and the material world? That's the very problem, right? You gotta bridge that gap.
Well, I don't see how there could be a world that wasn't in conformity to logical laws.
No, it's just side-skirting the issue. You got to describe the relationship between the abstraction and how it has any correlation to the physical world. How does that even transpire?
Well, I don't think that there can be any non-correlation. It's like asking me
how. No, you're just saying, well, it just correlates.
How could anything not correlate? How is it possible? Look, it's not even possible for something to.
Is there any explanation of how it correlates to the physical world?
Look, if you're asking me to explain why a soda can is a soda can, right? How does that?
Well, that's a human definition. We're We're talking about numbers. Okay, that's what we start out with. You want to jump to soda can. The materialistic ontology. Is it one soda can? How do you know it's one soda can? The concept you've been taught is merely just that, or what defines the ontological value that you want to just grasp onto and say, oh, I can just know this? How can you just know this? How does that even have any correlation to a materialistic particular in the material world?
Well, look, if you just go with any standard sort of foundationalist,
which is arbitrary, because what are you going to pick? That's what I'm pressing you on. Where do you pick?
I don't have to pick anything. Look, if you don't accept
which standard,
if you don't accept basic mathematical truths, well, I don't think there are standards.
Who's basic mathematical truths?
Listen. If you don't accept a basic truth like 2 + 2 = 4, I'm not going to be able to provide an argument.
In what logic?
What?
In what logic?
What logic are you talking about?
Which standard of logic are you applying?
Look, I don't understand what you're asking. Look,
bivalence, trivalence, which?
Well, I take
logic. Which?
I take logic to be bivalent. Right?
Why?
I'm talking about bivalent logic.
Well, there's other systems. Why do you just pick and choose? Why not? Why that over against others?
Because I don't understand how the others systems.
You're assuming there's just one logic that everyone should just turn to.
Look, if you disagree with the principle of bivalence, that a proposition can be either true or false.
I agree with you. Okay, I'm saying why. I'm questioning you why you're holding to what you're holding to. Not that I disagree with you. I'm questioning you on your foundation. You're saying that is just ipso facto the foundation.
Look, if I don't understand what argument you could offer, right? So why do you believe?
I'm saying the issue I pressed you on was how it has any correlation to the physical world.
Presumably, you think there's a way to account for the principle of bivalence. What is that?
The law of logic, yeah.
We've moved to the principle of bivalence. The principle of bivalence is that all propositions are either true or false.
What's truth? What is truth? What's true?
I'm asking you
truth in that?
I'm asking you about the principle of bivalence. You said that you could justify a bivalent logic. That was the claim that you made, right? That you can justify. I might not be able to
grounding for it, yeah.
Look, I might not be able to
ontological grounding of why they're abstract objects such as that.
Assume for the sake of argument that I don't know a justification for the principle of bivalence. That's
you don't.
It doesn't follow from that fact that God exists, right? And it doesn't follow from that.
Give me an argument for its ontology. Anything.
Look, I don't. Again, I might be on the fence about the ontology of something like the principle of bivalence, but you claimed that you can account for something like the principle of bivalence, right?
Yeah.
So what's the account? Now, in your account, you have to not assume, right? To show that the principle of bivalence is true, in your argument, you have to not assume the principle of bivalence. That means that your propositions can be true, false, or indeterminate, right? In your
contrary there, because that which goes against God's will and against God's mind is false. Therefore, we have the definition of false.
Look,
easy peasy.
You want to say, yeah, right, but I'm asking you to justify the principle of bivalence, though.
I just did. I just grounded it.
No, look, the conclusion of your argument, I'm not really following your argument. The conclusion of your argument should be, therefore, logic is bivalent, right?
Yes, I just did.
So what's premise one of your argument?
Which is contrary to God's mind, it therefore is false.
It doesn't follow from there being false facts because trivalent logics.
How do you know what's true or false?
Trivalent logics accept falseness, right? But they're trivalent.
You're not a trivalent list. You're bringing up what you don't assert.
I'm asking you to justify.
Bivalence, true or false?
Look, saying that falsity exists is not justifying the principle of bivalence.
Is trivalence true or false?
Well, I take logics not to be trivalent. I mean, there are logics that are trivalent, but I don't.
When I ask the question, is trivalence true or false? Am I not already presupposing bivalence? I mean, it's because the very question being asked of the person that wants to put forward trivalence, you brought that up as a side issue. I said, well, that's what I bring up to them. Is that true or false? They'd have to affirm bivalence. Either way.
Yeah, they can say
self-refuting.
They can say that that's a false dichotomy. If someone who was believed logic and propositions were trivalent, they could say that that's a false dichotomy. They could say that logic is
Is it the actual truthness?
What's that?
True?
Look, just because something is true, right? It doesn't follow that.
What is true?
Listen. You're not listening, right?
Not defining truth. You keep spitting that out, yet you have not even defined what it is.
Look, it doesn't matter if I haven't
using it.
Look, I don't see why if I haven't.
You keep jumping over the and utilizing these words, which you don't have no right to.
You're avoiding the argument. You're avoiding the argument. You're not paying attention, right? You're focusing on what I'm doing instead of.
You're using words such as truth. That's what you're doing.
Listen to the argument. Look, listen to the argument. People who accept trivalence accept that logic can have three types of properties. It can have the property of being true. It can have the property of being false. It can have the property of being indeterminate. Or there might be some other types of trivalent logics that I'm unaware of. What? I'm not trying to provide an account for truth.
What is it?
Right? It doesn't look. I'm not trying to provide an account for truth. Just because.
But you're using this word haphazardly all over the place.
It doesn't look. There can be. It doesn't matter whether or not I'm a correspondent.
Define it, please. Thank you for the audience.
It doesn't matter if I'm a correspondence theory with regards to truth. It doesn't matter whether I'm.
What is it? What is it? I don't care. Don't give me what you negate.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether I'm. It doesn't matter whether I'm a.
So you're just going to say, you're not this, you're not that, you're not that, you're not this, you're not that.
Irrelevant.
What is
I'm
it?
saying it's irrelevant. That's what I'm saying. It's irrelevant.
No, you use the word, it's relevant.
It's irrelevant whether I'm a coherentist about truth. It's irrelevant whether I'm a pragmatist about truth. It's irrelevant whether I'm a deflationist about truth. All of those things are ultimately going to be irrelevant because they don't change, they don't change whether or not propositions are true or false. Your theory of truth doesn't change what propositions are true or false.
You have no clue what it is. You can't even define it. You tell me what it's not.
Look, it's irrelevant.
What's your
pointing out that it's not relevant. I'm pointing out that it's not relevant.
I think your mic's not working.
Just tell me your affirmative.
I think Matt Slick's trying to say something. His mic's not. Can't hear your brother Matt Slick.
No, I wasn't trying to say anything. I think Matt Yester is doing a very good job. I'm just taking notes. I'm loving this, but I was just agreeing with what Matt Yester was saying. And
no, I'd like to know the answer because if you don't
if you don't define your terms, you can't argue.
Yeah, I mean, why are you using the word? Why does it not matter if you keep using it? I mean, it seems like it matters to you.
Well, look, because I'll point out, I'll explain why. I'll explain why I said what I said. Because let's say that the pragmatic theory of truth is true for the sake of argument. It doesn't change what propositions are true. If it's true that the Earth revolves around the sun, then what we're analyzing then is we're saying that it's pragmatic or whatever that the Earth revolves around the sun. If my theory of truth is that it coheres with some other set of belief, then what is true is I'm saying then the Earth revolving around the sun is that coheres with the other set of propositions that I take to be true. If it's something like the correspondence theory of truth, then what I'm saying when the Earth revolves around the sun, then what that proposition being true means is that corresponds to reality. If I'm a deflationist about the theory of truth, and on, for every single theory of truth. So me having an account for my theory of truth is going to be irrelevant as to whether or not the propositions themselves are true.
Well, realistic, I'll kind of say.
The point is, I don't know whether you're going to jump from some other theory to say, well, I don't hold to that, Matt. I want to know what your position is, period, so I can represent you accurately, not what you don't believe. I want to know what you do believe.
It's not relevant.
Ferret around 50 different things you don't believe. That's just wasting time.
It's not relevant what I believe. Because it doesn't.
Yes, it is.
No, it does. No, it's not. That's
You're
why
challenging us,
that's
right?
why I brought up
Are
those.
you
That's the case,
challenging
then you're
us?
not needed
I brought
here.
up those other things. The
Why?
reason I brought up those other things is to show that it's irrelevant because the proposition.
No, you're saying there's these other views.
No, I'm
That's
not
all
saying
you're
that there are other
saying.
views. That's not what I'm saying. You're not listening. Again, you're not listening, right?
You're not listening. I'm
what I'm
talking
saying
to
is-
you.
what I'm
I'm
saying
not
is-
talking to 50 other people that hold different views than you.
Hey, real
What I'm
quick,
saying
would-
is,
would
what I'm
you
saying
say-
is, the
One second,
if
real
the
quick,
proposition
would you
that
say
the
that-
Earth revolves around the sun is true, then we can analyze that under any theory of truth, and it's still going to be true. So whatever my theory of truth is going to be irrelevant to the truth of that proposition, because that will still be
Laws of
true
logic
under
here,
every
not
single theory
physical
of truth.
manifestations of objects in relation to. That's a different. We were talking about numbers, and you dive into the Earth revolves around the sun. That's different than numbers, ain't it? Because different types of things have different evidence towards them. I'm trying to narrow down where you're actually coming from metaphysically and epistemologically, and how you even have any coherence between knowledge, which is abstract, and anything relevant to the physical world. How you bridge the gap between your metaphysics and epistemology. How
Well,
do you?
I don't think knowledge is abstract. And first of all, I think knowledge is a belief, and I don't think
Is
beliefs
it
are
chemical?
abstract. What?
It's not abstract. What is it?
Oh, I take it to be a type of non-natural concrete object. What?
It's metaphysical. It's not material in nature. You're saying it's immaterial. Duh. How do you have an immaterial abstract entities, such as the laws of logic, have any coherence to the physical world?
I don't understand.
How do you bridge the gap?
I don't understand the question, right? Because the question
How do
seems
you bridge the gap between, because you have different
the question
ontologies?
seems
Is
incoherent.
immaterial ontology different than physical ontology?
Well, I don't understand. Either something is ontologically, either something is
They're different
ontologically.
natures. One has a physical presence. One does not have a physical presence. Right?
Right. So things that are
Ontologically,
physical,
they're different.
right. Things that are not.
How do you get two things that are ontologically different into the same realm?
Look, I don't understand. Why is ontology disparate?
We're
I
talking
don't.
about the very nature and essence of things. And we're talking
Right.
about two different
I don't
types
know.
of
I don't
things.
know. I don't know why. I don't know why things are ontologically the way they are.
Different, but I'm asking, that's what I'm pressing you on. I'm bringing this issue to your mind for you to explain for the audience that you have these two things in reality. How? Any explanation from your worldview of how you get these things. You're saying that just they are. We agree. I'm saying, can you actually answer from your atheistic perspective how you get the two things into the same realm? Or are there two realms? What? I mean,
well, I don't even know. I don't even know the way you're using realm. I take it that
are they two different planes of existence, or
I don't know what you're asking. The things that are not material are not spatially extended, right? The things that are non-natural are not.
How's there any
spatially extended.
coherence between the two?
What's incoherent about affirming that the two exist? I don't
I'm
understand.
not saying that the two exist. It's not the
What are you asking?
taking what I'm saying and reverbaging it into something what I didn't say. I said, how's there any correlation between them?
What does it mean for something physical to not correlate to mathematical truths?
He didn't say that, you idiot. He's just asking you what is the correlation, not whether there is one. He's not positing that there is a disparity between the two.
All right, Prince.
Don't call names. Don't call names.
Hold on, Prince. Hold on.
Can I say
Sorry.
something for a second?
Still fired up.
Getting out of
We're
hand.
talking about the
Sorry, I'll mute
correlation.
myself. I'm sorry.
How's there any
Yeah.
relationship? Relationship, I'll use those two terms equivocally. That how is there any correspondence to or any relationship between two diametrically opposed ontologies?
Well, I don't take the ontologies to be diametrically opposed.
Or how are they not?
They're just not the same thing. That doesn't mean they're diametrically opposed.
They're not the same thing. They're not diametrically.
Right. Something being not the same thing doesn't mean it's diametrically opposed to the other.
We already delineated its ontology as completely other. I mean, it's one abstract, one's a physical manifestation, one's physical, non-physical. That's a direct negation, right?
And so there are these.
Is that not a direct negation?
Right. There are things that are physical and there are things that are not physical.
Yes. Is that a dichotomy?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. You affirm that.
Yeah, I affirm that.
Diametrically opposed. You just says the dichotomy. They're diametrically
Right,
opposed.
I'm saying, but diametrical, but something.
Ontologically, they
Let me explain what diametric opposition is, because it's saying if something is diametrically opposed to something, then it means that the two are mutually exclusive, and I don't take the two to be mutually.
Do you have any relationship between the two?
I would take the two to be mutually exclusive because I think the two can exist at the same time. So I don't.
How? You're just asserting that.
I don't know.
I'm asking you how.
I don't know.
I'm asking. That's why I'm pressing.
I don't know how the two can be. I don't know how the two can exist.
That's why I want the atheist to actually justify. Explain yourself. Not go. Well. Wow. That's a real conundrum. That's what you're giving me.
Look, it doesn't matter if I'm giving you that. None of that stuff justifies. None of that stuff justifies the proposition that God exists.
You're a smart dude. You're very astute, very logical thinker. But when pressed to the hilt, you guys gotta go. I cop out.
I don't see anything. Look, it just seems like what you're saying seems like what are you concluding from that? It doesn't follow that atheism is false just because I can't give an account. That's just
have not given an account. Period.
That's just
it off the ground.
Ignorance. That's an argument from ignorance. It doesn't follow from the fact that I can't account.
What you did is come into the brick wall and run into it. That's what you did.
I'm saying it just doesn't. It doesn't follow from the fact that atheists or that I can't.
Well, the atheist or the theist.
Are you going to let me finish? Are you going to let me finish the sentence? It doesn't follow from the fact.
It does.
No. How does it follow from the fact that I can't account for something that atheism is false?
Because you've already.
That's just an argument from ignorance.
You've proven it's insufficient.
I've said that's not saying atheism is insufficient. That's saying I don't have an account.
You haven't given a sufficient condition.
I don't have
given
an account.
it. You haven't offered it.
It doesn't show from the fact that.
So is there one?
Maybe.
And you know which one?
I don't know if there's something that accounts for how something has ontology. I'm not even sure the question makes sense.
But you're highly philosophical astute. I know you're a smart dude, but when pressed to the hilt, you just self-destruct.
I don't see how that's self-destructive.
Okay, well, no, because I don't know means you're wrong, Matt. Well, no,
no, I didn't say it means anybody's wrong. I'm saying that's the illegitimate inference that you're making.
He's saying it doesn't logically follow, but you haven't even given a grounding for logic. That's the whole point. I just pressed you on.
Right, I don't understand.
So you can't say it does not logically follow. You have not even grounded logic itself. You can't even make the assertion it does not logically follow. You haven't even.
That's a non sequitur. That's a non sequitur. Why don't you put that into a syllogism and show me how it follows?
Because you want to use logic, abstraction, and I ask you to ground that. You don't
how it follows. What's premise one of your argument? Why don't you put it into a syllogism and show me how it follows? What's premise one of your argument?
Why is a syllogism necessary?
Because he's claiming that just because I can't account for something, it shows that I can't use the thing that I can't account for.
The whole question is, why are you finite to begin with?
Look,
you answer that.
Suppose I don't know the answer. What follows?
Why are you finite?
Suppose I don't know the answer to that. What follows from that?
What do you the point I'm pressing you on here is you're saying, I don't know, I'm finite, and that's why I'm pressing you on here. Why can you even answer? You can't even answer that question. You can't answer a whole host of things to help you at this point. So you're saying you're limited by your knowledge. You've read and had logical inference from, and you had chemical stimuli to, and everything like that.
Atheism being true doesn't require that I account for everything. Atheism being true doesn't require that I account for everything.
You only have finite experience. How can you explain everything?
Look, atheism being true doesn't require that I account for everything.
So you're saying it's true. You're trying to say that paradigm explains everything.
No, I'm not trying to say that. I'm saying that a single proposition is true. I'm saying a single proposition is true. Just because I affirm that a single proposition is true doesn't mean I have an account for everything.
Who was a Christian? You would butt up against a Christian and say, well, we know because God, who's omniscient, who created us and defined everything, reveals to us that we can have metaphysical ontology and epistemological knowledge about things, and also an ethical ontology. And you're saying, well, no, that's not possible. I say, how do you even know that that's not possible, given your atheism, which has no account for anything thus far? Many good philosophical terms and like that, but there's no grounding to it.
Atheism isn't supposed to count for anything. Atheism
No,
is
you have a
opposition.
worldview.
Is it supposed to account for its own
It's supposed to
atheism?
know God. You have a view of the world that does not have God into account. Period. You have a view of the world that doesn't factor God into it.
What is what's
What's
the relevance of that?
I'm saying, how do you even ground what you're doing? You have no clue.
I don't understand. I don't
know.
understand the question. How you're asking? How are there material objects? Is that the question?
We're trying to ground ultimate reality on things, and you're saying, Matt, well, that's just absurd because I'm finite. I can't know what all reality is. So therefore, you're not really engaged into this debate to the hilt because you.
I'm not following.
Ship
I'm
out
not
the
following
taxi
the
cab
argument
whatever you
that
want.
you're making. I'm not following the argument that
I
you're
press
making.
you all the way to your
What's the
limitations.
first premise of your argument? Because I'm not following the argument you're
I
making.
pressed you on your presuppositions to the hilt.
What's the first premise of the argument that you're making?
I'm showing you. Well, the first
What's the
premise.
first premise? What's premise one of your argument?
God exists or doesn't exist. The Christian God either exists or does not exist. Premise one.
Okay, the Christian God exists or the Christian God does not exist. I accept premise one.
You have the non-Christian worldview, right?
What? Yeah, I don't believe God exists.
Correct.
Is that another premise?
I'm on the other end.
Premise?
It's
Is that another
a
premise?
true dichotomy, right?
All right. So premise one is God either exists or it is not the
Christian
case.
God either exists or doesn't exist.
Right. God exists or it is not the case that God exists. That's premise one. Right? Okay, so what's premise two? Josh, my name is Josh. Josh can't account for everything. Josh is an atheist.
It leads to absurdity because you've given
What's
me
the argument?
coherence.
You're not providing an argument, right?
You have not provided precondition of intelligibility, period. You have not. You say, I can't account for that. You just...
Yeah, I don't even know what it means to account for the preconditions of intelligibility.
Why we have intelligence such as
seems like that all assumes
we've been talking about for the past 30 minutes.
It seems like
and
that
you
all
keep
assumes
utilizing it and saying I can't ground it.
It seems that all assumes intelligibility. So any argument like that is going to beg the question. Any argument like that,
you have no idea what it is.
Any argument of that nature is going to beg the question.
You have no clue what intelligibility is. So when I press you to define your terms, you want me to define what intelligibility is. Yet
I'm not asking you to define anything. I'm asking you to construct an argument.
What your terms is, now you're hypocritically saying...
I'm not asking you to define anything. I'm asking you to construct an argument. I'm asking you to construct an argument.
You're demanding what you already negated.
I'm asking you to construct an argument. That's all I've been asking you to do.
I'm showing you. I can actually ground it.
What's premise one of the argument?
I've given it to you 2 times over.
All right, so premise one is God either exists.
Okay, so you did know. You
premise one is that God either exists or is not the case that God exists. What's the second?
Listening to understand, or are you listening just to rebut?
What's the second premise?
Just told you.
What's
the negation of not A.
The second premise. So the first premise is it is not the case. Is the case that God exists, or is not the case that God exists?
You're not A.
And the second,
simplistically.
And then the second premise. The second premise is it is the case that God exists. That's the second.
It is not the case that God does not exist.
Right. So that's a question-begging argument. So your argument fails.
It's a
because by the law of double negation.
It's a demonstrable.
Begging the question.
It's demonstrable because that's a reductio ad absurdum.
Look, you haven't shown that atheism is absurd, right? What you've shown.
Well, you've done enough thus far to prove that.
No, I haven't done anything. I haven't done anything.
You said quite a bit.
I said what something I made. Look, your argument is something analogous to. Do you know the number of stars in the sky? Well, then theism can't account for the number of stars in the sky because you don't know it. Therefore, theism is false.
That's not what we were talking about. That's not what we were talking about.
I'm saying I made an analogy.
Is that what we were talking about? Yes or no?
I made an analogy. It doesn't follow from the fact that I'm ignorant about something.
They didn't prove anything.
It doesn't follow from the fact that I'm
ignorant
about something. It doesn't follow from the fact that I'm ignorant about something that my worldview is
Your
false.
worldview cannot even ground itself. Period. You've already proven that.
I don't
There's
even
no
know what it
grounding.
means for something to ground
None.
itself.
You jumped out of the taxi cab long ago.
What does it mean for something to ground itself?
What is grounding? That's what I'm talking about. Ontological grounding, metaphysically. You
All
don't
right,
even answer the question.
Matt, we're going to move on from this. People are getting tired.
That's the whole
We've been
point.
going out with this guy for an hour at least.
Oh, those are perfect.
So, anyone else have questions? Ocean or Asbel?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Anything y'all would like to discuss? Because we're going to move on from this. This is going in circles now.
Well, yeah. I mean, I saw on Facebook the link said this was going to be talking about the war on men. That really interested me. I wanted to know what you guys were going to bring up and discuss.
War on men? What are you talking about?
John,
It's on the Facebook link in the Facebook group.
Yeah, John had that topic, didn't you, John? Oh, are you there, John?
Can you hear me?
I'll just say this.
Can you
I'll
hear
just
me?
say this. The last one.
Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah, we can.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
Finish
man.
up, Nate.
Okay. Yeah, let me just finish this real quick. Well, I was trying to really figure out, and I know I came in a little late, but from what I noticed is they were talking with a nihilist. Is that right? Or
Yeah.
Is a
The
nihilist?
realistic nihilist.
Here's what I could not wrap my head around. If one, he mentioned question begging, and so I just want to know, like, okay, in a nihilistic worldview, why should I care if I'm begging the question? That's why I would like him to answer. Why does that even matter if I beg the question? So what? Based on what standard is that wrong? And not only that, but on what standard am I obligated to give any truth back to his questions? Or
Yeah,
match
there is
it?
no point.
Is
There
that
is no
just wanting to avoid the debate or something, or what? Because it sounds like it was avoiding the debate as a question or as a response.
Well,
Does that make sense?
no, it's not like I'm saying that. Well, it did sound like people were avoiding questions.
Oh no! What you're
No,
saying
I
is,
think it was
why is it a problem? Why is it a problem for begging the question?
Well,
I mean, the answer would be that it's bad logic. But then you're saying, what standard means that I should answer the conversation in
Is
truth?
it always a fallacy?
I don't even know. I'm not really
The
a
issue
logic
is
guy
if
like
It's not
realistic
always a
nihilist is.
fallacy.
Nihilist would be the guy
know.
that would be able to answer the question that you're talking about. However, what my criticism of what you were saying was specifically when you were like, by what standard do I need to address the conversation with truth? More or less, I believe that's what you said. And that didn't...
Well, what I asked.
So what?
What I asked. Yep.
Right. So that seems to me like just exiting the debate. Like it is, if you're going to have a conversation with somebody, you should either approach it truthfully or not at all. Otherwise, you're not really dealing with a conversation at that point. Because I think that you have to agree on certain things in order to have a conversation. One is to approach the conversation honestly. Otherwise, it's not really worth having at that point, unless there's an ulterior motive.
Why should I be honest?
Where does that come into?
What obligation am I under to follow Aristotle?
Unless you want to have a dishonest conversation and that's your goal.
What's honesty?
So what? Why is that wrong?
Why is
Do you
this
not hold honesty in value?
What? No, it's
What
not
if I
whether
don't?
that. It's how you can ground even honesty.
Yeah. How would you ground it there? So what? What if I don't care?
I'm surprised that you guys don't value honesty.
Anyone holds a
Well, why do you?
nihilism is
Why
it's
should I value what you
irrelevant.
value?
It's irrelevant to a nihilist.
Who are
I'm
you
not a
to tell
nihilist.
me what I need to value?
Yeah.
I'm
What-
speaking personally,
what's
that
your
I'm surprised
authority?
that this is a hill that you're willing to fight a battle on.
Well, no, I mean, like, I want to know if you can ground me in authority. All you have is
I'm
just
not
your
a
word.
nihilist for the I think third time. I'm not a nihilist.
Okay.
No,
Well, that's
he
the,
was.
that's
The
where
other guy was.
Right, he
nihilism
was,
shoots itself
but
in the foot.
That's what he
I'm
was
saying.
questioning.
I'm thinking if you're going to be having
Not
the
you,
conversation,
Ocean.
I think that if you're
He's
going to be having
saying
the
to a
conversation,
nihilist, can you actually answer this from a nihilistic perspective? If you're not a nihilist, then it's irrelevant to you.
Well, if you're not a nihilist, then I'm not even going to have
If
this
you're
question.
having a conversation as a Christian, though, and then you're asking for him to justify honesty so that you can have a conversation honestly, that just surprises me with a
We're
Christian
representing-
saying
No,
that.
no, you're missing. I said ground it in something, ground it in an authority. But he still needs to establish that his rules of logic are actually authoritative and binding on me first. He needs to establish that.
I think that one way to do that would be to establish a contradiction in his logic set.
So what? What if Eastern logic's true and there are no contradictions?
He didn't have any metaphysics to ground it in. That's what I press him on. Metaphysics. Well, is
Do
it
you
just
need
materialistic
metaphysics to ground
naturalism?
logic?
Is it Hinduistic monism? A whole host of different things. Christian theism? Which? Metaphysics.
Why should I
You gotta
accept
ground this or
Western
something.
logic where there's contradiction rather than Eastern? That's the point.
Do any of those
I'm not
have
an Easternist, but I'm just, that's the point though. It's like, he has
do any of
no
those put value in
authority.
having a conversation dishonestly?
Huh?
Do
How's
any
it
of those put value
dishonest
on-
for me to ask him the grounding of the ontological nature of that? That's a
don't think it's necessarily
dishonest
dishonest.
question. How's that dishonest?
Doesn't matter what I believe.
That's not what I said.
No. When you say it was a because you bring up the issue of dishonesty, and the only
Nate-
questions I
Nate
would
brought
ask
up the
were
issue of
honest
dishonesty.
questions, saying, "Can you provide this?" It was an honest question. He just offered no positive affirmation from his worldview. He's very
Well,
ignorant.
my interpretation of what Nate said, sorry, was essentially, why should I be honest in the conversation?
Yeah. Why?
Is that, like, you're a Christian? Do you not put
Oh,
value
so
in
you
honesty?
have nothing other to say than the
We
grounding
can.
of my Christianity in which to appeal to honesty? That's interesting. Almost sounds like you have to borrow from my worldview in order to do that.
Yeah. How do
That's
you
the
ground
point.
honesty?
I'm looking at it from your worldview. I have a worldview
Yeah.
that values honesty as well. But
How?
why would you want to, like,
Well, can you
Why would you
ground
put
it
it into
other
question?
than that God exists? That's what I would like to know.
What's your standard?
Is if
I'm a
you
theist.
ground on it, because if you have to ground honesty because I'm a Christian, then guess what? You're assuming that my my standards and my worldview are true to make sense of your own standards.
But
Okay, if you're
Ocean's a
all right, you're a
polytheist,
theist.
which I wanted
Well,
to
if
start the
you're
whole
theist-
hangout on that issue because realists and nihilists and just in there and talking with Matt Slick and everything like that. I want to ask Ocean because he's a polytheist.
Right.
How is there any distinction?
Oh, so a theist with an S at the end.
Well, he would say, well, yeah, there's a God.
Polytheist.
He says there's multiple gods. But
Right.
I asked him before the hangout, before we went live, I said, are they all equal? I want to have him answer that.
Why would that
And
matter?
how did you ascertain this knowledge, Ocean, that they're all equal?
Why would that matter?
Because that's what I wanted to ask you. That's why.
And what do you
it
mean by
matters.
knowledge at that
Dodge.
point?
How did you ascertain the knowledge that you know this to be a true fact? How did
Personal
you
experience
ascertain
and
the
reading.
knowledge?
Are you asking, like, how I came across the information or about certainty?
You come across information, then reflect upon things, go through a logical process of delineating things. Maybe there's a whole host of things you did
Uh-huh.
process. So if you really want to ferret that out, maybe if you want to explain that, I don't know how in detail, I'm just asking for a very surface level, basic answer to it. Since
Reading,
you seem to
self-reflection,
understand,
and
well, what do you
personal
mean really
experience.
by no? Well, I can mean a lot of things by that. When you actually proffer some information to actually
Can I be heard?
position.
Well, I'd like to know the other gods I'm not serving, apparently.
Okay, are we good? Are you guys okay?
Wow.
Well, as I've said earlier, or as I was trying to say, it's through a lot of reading and then also personal experience.
Okay. And what sort of things do you read and
There's
study about?
the Norse sagas and Eddas.
Okay. And these are gods that came out of the creation.
Tyler, wait a minute. Yeah, that'd be true, huh? We just believe one less God than you. Probably 50 less
Yeah,
God.
that's why I said, how'd you, and my question to you, Ocean, was how'd you know they're all equal? You haven't answered that question. But no, they are not all equal.
As far as how I know that.
Logically.
That's why I was asking about what you're talking
Because,
about with knowledge.
you know, the usual argument that what Tyler brought up there, yeah, I just believe in one less God than you is usually the atheist argument. And what's the assumption there? All gods are equal. Do you believe that?
Wait, say that again because you kind of muffled the last part of that.
The atheist, and I'm sure you're atheist argument or heard of atheist argumentation that, well, Dan Parker uses this. Well, we just believe in one less God than you. You're an atheist when it comes to Thor and Odin and Zeus and all that thing. We just go one step further, believe in one less God from you. What's the assumption inherent in that argument? All gods are equal, aren't they? They're all parallel ontologically, right?
I don't think that all gods are equal. I think that's a silly notion.
That's why I asked you when before we started the hangout. I thought we were going to jump right into it. Realistic nihilists just jumped the gun.
Yeah, you guys just kind of went for it.
But that's what I wanted to ask you. I said, "Oh, you're a polytheist," and I asked you, "Are all gods equal?" I think you said yes.
No, I said no.
Well, you did say, because my second question I put in my notebook was, "Oh, how did you ascertain this knowledge?" You did affirm it, unless you're contradicting now.
No, I said no. I don't think that all gods are equal.
What?
I don't think that would make any sense.
Okay, how did you ascertain that knowledge?
Gods revealed
I was just thinking about it. Like, why would they all be equal if they're different? If they're different gods, why would they all be equal?
Which is a superior god?
Pardon?
Oh, you already have a hierarchy, right? They're not all the same. Therefore, there's differentiation. Right. Therefore, that necessitates hierarchy, right?
Sure.
Okay, that's logically coherent right there from your position. So you have a differentiation between. So my question to you now is, how do you know which is the ontological highest? In it'd be like the RK, the chief, the ruler, which is the first, or the first in position.
Well, that's when you start going through the documents that we have about that from other people who have had these experiences.
Can you actually directly answer my question instead of sidetracking? Because I said, how do you know? Which one
asking
is it?
How do we know? So I said, well, you go through the documents of other people.
Which one is it? Experiences. Which one is it?
There's multiple ideas about that.
I'm asking you, which one is it?
There's multiple ideas
your
about
position,
that.
Not what other people or 50 other or 100 different people think about it. That's not what I asked you. I didn't ask you, hey, Ocean, what do 100 or 156 billion other people think about this issue? I said, Ocean, which one do you believe is the highest?
What do you mean by highest then? Just so I can make sure that I answer you appropriately.
The ruler of all the gods.
Oh, the ruler would be.
There's an ontological distinction because they're not all the same. You said they're different.
Right. So if you say, like, if you asked,
if they're not the same, there's one higher than the other.
Would you like for me to answer your questions, or do you want to keep asking, like, piling up questions on top of each other? Because it's difficult to have a conversation.
And I have to rebut you and say,
I'm asking you to clarify.
You answer the question I did not ask. I asked you not about the billion of the opinion.
Did you hear my answer?
Billion people on the planet.
I already answered you. Did you hear it?
Which position do you hold?
I think I've answered. I've answered twice now.
Did
you hear my answer?
God.
1 second. Matt, can you just allow Ocean to talk? There's a lot of butting.
Okay. I asked him direct questions to him. He tells me what other people believe.
I've answered.
That's not what I asked. I mean, the cognitive dissonance between directly asking a question to him and the answer he gives me completely separate. And when I call out
I asked you to clarify a question by asking what you mean by highest, to which you provided a definition.
Yeah.
At which point I answered. And if you would like, do you want to hear the answer again, or were you listening? Or were you instead talking?
Which one is it?
Odin.
Okay. How did you arrive at that?
This is the All-Father.
Pardon?
As stated in the scriptures.
In what scriptures?
The Eddas.
And
these are the words of the gods. Among which are the Havamal, the words of Odin.
And Odin is ontologically what?
The wisest of gods and the leader.
Did he create all things?
Not all things.
Who created all things?
Probably
He
chaos.
can't be the chief if he's part of the creation.
Now, that's a Christian idea.
So
The creator has to be the one that's in control.
Well, okay.
A lot of religions don't have that.
There's no creation of all
Christianity
things.
is unique in that it says
So
the
you
creator
can't-
has to be the one that is highest.
So you can't
have
even
a creator
account for
not the highest.
creation ontology. It's already the creation's here. Odin's a god, but he didn't create the physical world. How
Right.
did Odin?
Odin came out of
ontology
chaos.
exist? He's eternal.
Odin was either born or came out of chaos.
Which one?
You're not answering the question because you're side-skirting the issue of ontological creation. So creation is eternal. The physical states of things.
No, I believe in. I have a similar argument to the Kalam about chaos bringing the universe and the gods into existence.
How does chaos bring the universe into existence?
Is this constantly creating?
Chaos?
Mhm.
So we're all in chaos.
Right. It's an ancient idea, older than Christianity.
Yeah, that's stupid.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, you can't have an argument against that because it's all really chaos. I'm just predetermined just to spit that out just like anything else. There's no dialoguing with you.
Well, I just answered
stupid.
your questions.
I know.
And your response to it is stupid.
Yep.
Okay.
You can't have a problem.
I don't see.
You can't have a problem with that. This is certain
I don't have a
chaos
problem
is
with you
your
calling-
foundation for all things. I don't care how much you want to bloviate or disagreement. There is no disagreement. It's just chaos.
Sure.
You can't even say that something disagrees with you or
I can say that something
makes you
disagrees
feel
with me,
bad,
but I know-
whatever. It's just chaos.
Unless you agree with me, I can say that you disagree with me.
There's no agreement.
Okay.
There is no.
Then you do disagree
can't even
with
bring
me.
up the term.
Again, 1 second. Ocean, can you define what you meant by
You're trying to use even words in a logical.
I can't hear you, General, because he's talking. And Matt seems to like to dominate
Stop
conversation.
speaking in sentences. Just stop speaking in
Matt,
sentences.
1 second. Define for us what you mean by chaos.
And chaos would be the primordial creation.
Transition from chaos to order in your position?
Sure, that would be the creation.
Okay. And that technically is in Genesis 1 verse 2. You start with Tion, the chaotic waters, and then it transitions, a proper creation.
If you guys want to see it that way, sure.
I think what man was trying to get at is you can only have God by definition, the supreme being, but anything less than that, why call it God if it's not as supreme as he is?
Yeah.
Well, then you get
That's
into.
an overriding
I see the.
Then how is it
impotence
God?
and such as being absurd, because then you have a God that can't do certain things.
So is chaos a god? Because chaos.
No, I don't see chaos as a god. Chaos is something else.
So what
Yeah,
preceded? Nothing preceded Odin.
Chaos is indeed a god in the ancient Near East. Yeah.
I think that the Greeks sort of see him that way, but even they see chaos as a little bit different than the gods.
Yeah, but maybe they're
Like
right.
he is the source of it rather than a god.
You can argue, say, well, they're wrong, and I hold this view. Like, can't call them wrong. But you had things that preceded Odin
Do these
ontologically.
Sure.
gods demand worship?
No.
No. Then how do they reveal themselves to you?
Do you have to have a god that requires worship in order for them to reveal themselves?
Well, maybe not worship per se.
I don't
but
know how that
The
follows.
question still stands either whether they require worship of you or not. How do they reveal this? Like, I just don't see how.
I don't know the technicalities. of how
Chaos
God works.
just comes up to you to says, "Hi, I'm Chaos, also known as God."
That's the ontology.
Chaos wouldn't
Did you say
interact
that
with the
in your
universe.
sleep one
Chaos
day,
would
or-
have to be separate from the universe? Being chaos, the universe would be order. So chaos wouldn't be able to interact with it.
How do you get order from disorder?
I don't know how else you get order.
like again, it's the very negation of the thing that brings about the thing. How does that work?
Like if chaos is that which is constantly changing, and order is structure, then eventually that which is changing would create structure.
How do you get structure from chaos?
Because the chaos is something that's constantly changing. Therefore, it would.
But there's no structure to chaos. There is no structure.
Right.
That's what ontologically separates to. How do you get the thing from the negation of the thing?
I just explained it. I don't know. If
Hang on. Let me see if I can figure out something. You said that chaos sometimes changes, resulting in order, but that doesn't make sense to me. It sounds like you're saying that chaos sometimes isn't chaos anymore. It's order, which would then mean it's not order changing. It's not chaos changing. It's just changing from chaos to order.
Right.
Now, why would that means that you're not. But that means chaos is not changing. It just means that chaos stops existing, and then you have order. There's a contradiction between the two.
Yeah. Right. Order would come out of chaos.
No, it does not.
No, it doesn't.
Come out of order.
You're saying it comes out of. What the heck does that mean? Explain yourself. Not merely.
Is that hard to understand?
Explain yourself.
Yes.
Something has to cause the order. It's not random in and of itself.
Yeah.
It's chaos by definition.
Well, if chaos is something that's constantly changing,
so then something
get something that would be order, would it not?
Chaos.
Man, I can't hear you.
But it's kind of funny.
Your webcam just went dark too.
Yeah, it went dark.
But
Okay.
somebody, you're back. Oh. Who's hiding?
Oh, there we go. That's weird. Sorry. If chaos is what it is, how can order come out of chaos unless something acts upon it that's different than chaos?
If chaos is constantly changing, then it is constantly in action, is it not?
If chaos is constantly changing, then its nature is chaos. Chaos nature would have to change into order. Then what would if it's generated from self? If the change was self-generated, then it's not a change. It's by nature.
Yeah.
Therefore, it would have to be external. So then you have something else besides chaos acting upon it to bring order.
I think the change that chaos does is internal.
Then you're saying that it's nature. The change is natural to its nature. That
Right.
chaos has not changed its nature. It's
So
still
is it
chaos by
organized
definition.
chaos?
Say what?
All
Is
chaos.
it organized chaos?
property.
It's three people talking at the same time.
Yeah, you're saying it's internal to itself.
Speaking of chaos. Yeah.
How's there any order to chaos when it's the very negation of the thing you're trying to assert it changed into?
Self-refuting.
Yeah. You're saying, how do you get the thing from its negation?
I don't see chaos as something that has to be logical.
That's like trying to get a married bachelor, to be honest.
What is chaos then? Is chaos order?
Chaos
Well,
would
I
create
think
order.
a more clearer question would be: Is chaos that supreme deity by which everything else comes into existence?
See, that's what you.
Or was there a deity?
That's kind of, I think that's kind of how it would work. Like if you wanted to find a supreme deity by you guys' definition of being the creator, then that would be it.
Any metaphysical explanation of how this actually transpired before engaging in logical contradiction?
Who produced chaos?
Chaos would be self-existent.
Eternal?
Right.
Is there causation inside of chaos?
Right. There would be no causation for chaos. It would be the state of nothingness.
You have no causation.
Then it has to have the necessary and sufficient conditions to bring something into existence. Is this chaos personal or not personal?
I would say it's impersonal.
If it's impersonal,
But that would be an assumption. I wouldn't know that to be the case.
if it's impersonal, it can't work, because then it would have to possess eternally the necessary preconditions, the necessary sufficient conditions to bring a certain event order into existence. And if it possessed it and it's not personal, then it's by nature. And if it's by nature, then the result will be instantaneous and not eternally. And then you would be, in a sense, now in order. But we have chaos in our universe, and philosophically, your position doesn't work. It can't.
I don't think that our universe has chaos in the sense.
You couldn't even make sense out of time.
Yes, have you ever been married? Sorry. You got kids? Trust me, there's chaos.
Well, I would even go to your statement. I'm sorry, I don't know what your name. I think is it Ocean or is it
Yeah,
Nate?
it's Ocean.
Is it
You're
Atlantic
Ocean, okay.
or Pacific?
Yeah. Ocean. You said that the nature of chaos is constantly changing, but then you said you take it to be eternal. If it's constantly changing, how do you know it's eternal? Can it change from being eternal to being non-eternal?
The idea that chaos is eternal is something that I just proffer. I don't actually know that.
Oh, so you're just so you don't know that anything. You're just throwing things out there. You have no idea.
The idea that chaos is eternal is something that is completely theoretical.
You're refuting yourself. You're refuting yourself.
It's called throwing poop at the wall and seeing what sticks.
You're refuting yourself
Largely,
because you don't have any logic.
Guys, we're talking about something that is outside of this universe that could be outside of logic, and isn't something that we know anything about, nor can we have any sort of empirical data about. This is just putting out an idea.
Then it's arbitrary.
One second. Speaking of logic, though, like, isn't it ironic that to be chaotic, you require logic to pre-exist for something to then be defined as chaotic or not chaotic?
Right, but at the same time, I think there are aspects of it that can be. Well, there are aspects of it that can seem self-refuting. So it could be something that
chaos being within a pre-existing, law of logic, or does chaos have inherent in it?
I think that even logic has some sort of structure to it, meaning that it would be order, which means that it's possible that it wouldn't apply to chaos. So it can be self-refuting and be fine.
It can be self-refuting.
That's one way of looking at it. That's a really weird way of looking at it, sure, but
it's
something that we don't have very many. Like, you can't verify anything that's outside of the universe. I don't know if logic works outside of the universe.
Hey guys, I just want to ask Tyler Vale something after this.
1 second. I have one word to define this god. Troll.
What?
There's, tongue-in-cheek word to define this chaos god is the ultimate troll.
It's fun. It can be used as a troll, definitely.
Because
but it's what a lot of people have questions about when they start talking about like any kind of paganism. Is a lot of them go back to this chaos idea because it's a Greek idea that a lot of other religions sort of use, and it's interesting because there's a lot of it presents a lot of logical quandaries of being a prime mover that is also, in some cases, self-refuting. It's one of the, kind of the aspects about it. And that makes it interesting. It's kind of a puzzle.
So basically logical contradictions is this God that it's so chaotic that logical contradictions is basically a necessary attribute.
Right.
Okay.
And again, this is something that is just an idea. It's not something that's a cornerstone necessarily to the religion. Like, obviously, according to the Norse, the universe came about in some way, but there's not really a description of it. It could be that that's a story that's lost. It could be there was never a story about that. So I don't know. It could be that the universe itself is eternal. But then there's philosophical problems with that
how would
too,
you
aren't
relate this being to basically our universe? How does our universe, in fact, how does our universe relate to this being? If it's so
to chaos,
erotic,
other than it being the first, like the prime mover, so to speak, it would not be related. Which is the reason why talking about it in a way that proves it wrong or something like that, from a logical standpoint, which you can do, it just chaos sort of squeaks out of that by being chaos. So
you mean there's no direct,
but it wouldn't necessarily be like there's nothing contingent.
How's there any logical correlation of causation in chaos?
Well, the universe would be the order aspect, so it would have to have causation.
But you don't have that in chaos.
No.
But you're saying that generated.
But you would in something that is order. Order has to have.
That's where you're jumping the bridge, and there's no bridge existing. You're jumping from one land to another land. There's no bridge between them. You're just saying it makes that leap.
That's what chaos is.
In chaos, there's no logical relationship of causation between one thing leading to another. It's chaos.
Unless you have it going into order. If you have chaos into chaos, I agree.
When you have one thing
reason to have
relating to
a
another,
logical
you have order. There's no relationship in chaos. You're saying it's chaos, and then all of a sudden a relationship forms. There's no correlation between the thing which caused the thing that comes subsequent.
How does this chaos thing connect with polytheism?
Chaos causes
again?
order. It's a Greek idea. The gods come from chaos.
But when pressed upon that, you assert it. You can't dive any deeper in the mere assertion of that.
Right. No, I admit that.
Okay.
So
I'm
Ocean,
fine with
how
stating
does
this is just an
Odin
assertion.
relate?
It doesn't really. Odin would have
It's
come out
saying
of
your
chaos.
grounding there is faulty.
No, I think it's
a
honest.
logical contradiction.
Plus, you've made the problem of
What's the
evil
logical
eternal.
contradiction?
The what?
What's the logical contradiction that you're talking about?
Oh, you're getting something that's diametrically opposed to what came before, and you're saying that's antecedently causal to the thing you end up getting, and you're just saying, well, it just does this.
Right. I wouldn't understand how you would get order without chaos.
You don't have order coming from from disorder because it's a direct negation of it. You're saying you get the thing from its negation. That's a contradiction.
Have you ever rolled dice before?
Yeah.
Yeah. That would be order coming from chaos.
No.
Rolling the dice creates chaos, and then the dice landing.
No,
is a
not because. As a
Do you see
Christian,
that?
I believe there's no random events in all of creation. Even the lots are cast.
So whenever you throw
before the
dice,
Lord.
you know what it's going to land on.
I didn't say I know it, but
Okay.
its whole decision is from the Lord. That's what Proverbs 16.
It's an analogy for a reason.
No,
So
you're
it's-
talking to
I'm
a
talking about
Christian.
whether or not you would know. So is an
no.
introduction of chaos and then chaos generating
No,
order.
I do know its whole decision is from the Lord. Proverbs 16:33.
So
That's how I know.
a Christian looks at it and introduces God into the analogy when he wasn't
doesn't
addressed
say,
in the analogy. So
I
that's
know
fine.
all external factors because I'm not in control of physics. God is. Okay. He's the one under supernatural control of all things and sustaining all things.
So you're avoiding the analogy on purpose.
No, because you asked me personally if I know the outcome, but Scripture testifies that there's no random event we perceive random. It's random from our perspective because we don't know all external factors. He does because he's the one who defines and sustains them. And Scripture testifies of that fact. You're talking to a Christian, so I'm going to give you a biblical Christian answer to it. When you say, oh, no, Matt, you got to presuppose my view. Well, I know how you're viewing things. I'm showing you how that compares to a Christian worldview about things. Your application to me has no relevance given my metaphysics. Okay? And what Scripture testifies of regarding that. There is no random events or anything like that. Everything is under God's sovereign control, even the rolling of a dice. Because I'm not the one
That would be
of it.
your assertion. But we
No,
were
I
talking.
have
I
no
thought.
idea the
I thought you were attempting to understand my beliefs, not superimpose your beliefs over mine.
No, I'm showing the contrast between.
So I was
them.
attempting.
But you haven't given any ontological.
You were asking about
grounding.
how order can come from chaos. I provided an analogy, and then you inserted your God into the
Without
analogy.
the Christian God, how do you do it?
What makes you think they're random to begin with? I think is what I'm
exactly.
trying to ask.
And from the Christian perspective, they're not. That's already out the window.
We
You're
reject
turning
the
them
idea that
random.
they're random.
So you're just ignoring the analogy and
No,
inserting
it's
your God into
what
it.
makes you assume it's random.
Yeah, on your own basis.
Analogies don't prove anything.
The analogies are meant to generate understanding.
So
If
what?
that's not what you're interested in, then fine.
Well, subjective understanding
Analogous, but
maybe
parallel.
doesn't mean you've established your understanding as being true with
What
your
your
analogy.
assertion is, Ocean, you're saying if you roll a dice because you are ignorant of all external factors, therefore nothing can. That's what your assertion is from your worldview. That's why you will assert chaos and then order coming from chaos. Because
When you
you,
guys are
define a
asking me
human being,
questions,
cannot know it. It seems random from you. Therefore, you're going to make the hasty generalization. Well, no one can know.
I'm not quite
No
sure. if
one can know. Finite.
Matt, Jesus. Hold on a second, Matt. So I'm not sure if I'm in a conversation or a duel. in this conversation, are you attempting to understand my position, or are you just attempting to
challenging yours and also offering the contra position to your position?
So you're not attempting to understand it?
I am understanding yours. If on your ground, therefore it cannot be knowable because in your worldview, there's nothing that can be known of all the external factors.
I think we understand it more than you understand it.
Yeah. You're saying from your perspective, you roll a die.
Why are you
have
ignoring
no
the
clue how it's going to come up? Because if you did know all the external factors, the laws of physics, the revolution of the earth, the wind coming against it, and everything like that, you can predict it to the detail of what that die is going, or the roll of 2 die are going to come up as. You can be precise in that and saying, well, that's not ascertainable. Therefore, no one can know. That's the assumption you're making there. The hasty generalization, because you as a finite human being cannot know it. Therefore, no one, even not even God, could. But in the Christian worldview, God predestines all things according to his will, and he's under sovereign control of the laws of physics.
Imagine if you guys could access that. You guys make great gamblers.
Well, I'm not saying I know it.
No, I'm saying if you could access that. What I said was, imagine if you guys could access that, you guys would make great gamblers.
If I could access it, man, I'd be awesome at craps, man. You know, I would be. True. You have to
it's
have
like just spend all of your time in Las Vegas getting doing red black over and over again because you would know the answer if you could access that.
So go to card counting or whatever.
But at that point, it wouldn't be.
Well, I mean, you wouldn't even have to do card counting. You would just be fortune telling.
Well, no, not fortune telling per se. I would actually be, if I was as powerful as God, I could create the hand. That I can actually create the hand, and not like Molinism where I become fated to a hand, but I actually create the hand. You know, that wins.
Nice.
Yeah.
So
create what?
There you go, Tyler. Shout out to you right away.
Yeah, that was a good debate, Tyler. Really, really good. Wanted to give a shout out to you. That was a good, really, really good discussion.
Tyler, what did you debate?
Yeah.
What did we had a debate on Molinism.
Oh, okay.
Keep going. I just wanted to give a shout out to that comment.
Cool.
Yeah. Well, you inspired me. Well, God's words inspired me.
Yeah, that's a Christian standard, and that's the thing by which we'll oppose any opponent. By which, I mean, Ocean, you're very articulate, very kind, just as like realist and nihilist is. When we get into these deeper issues, it comes down to pressing your opponent upon certain things.
Right.
And you just got to the same point where realist and nihilist just jump ship. And
pardon?
Well, you got to the same point that realistic nihilist did. He jumped ship, and you're doing the same thing now. When pressed to the hilt on things, right?
I don't feel like I'm jumping ship.
Sure. You're asserting a logical contradiction, but not affirming it. I mean, you're asserting it, but not realizing that you're doing it, and you want to call it out upon.
What's the contradiction?
You're getting order from chaos, the thing from the negation of the thing.
Right. Well, I said that chaos doesn't necessarily have to obey logic, because logic is ordered of itself.
Is logic ordered?
Yeah.
How do you get logic from chaos?
Chaos would create it.
How?
That's what it does.
It's not the non-logical creation.
Out of the constant changing of things, you would eventually get ordered properties.
Okay. The non-logical, some point, is this like a logical priority or a temporal? Which one is it?
Well, let's say that the dice, for the sake of the analogy, to try and get the analogy to work, assume for a second that the dice truly are random, but they still land on one side, right?
Truly random.
Right. What would prevent, if there isn't a God, what would prevent the dice from functioning?
That's why I ask you, because you're the non-biblical theist here.
Right. Well, I'm asking you what would prevent it. You're the one that believes in the God.
No, you're asking
you have the
me.
all-powerful God that controls everything and knows everything. I don't believe in that concept. So what would prevent?
But that's the thing where you're jumping from your sandbox into mine, and you're going to step into mine.
I'm asking a question about your sandbox because you won't let me talk about my perspective without introducing your sandbox and throwing your
So
sand.
you can't apply it to my sandbox because that's jumping ship. I mean, you're jumping out of your worldview into mine.
I'm attempting to understand your
You gotta
perspective
deal with
because
mine
we're
on
throwing sand in
my
my
own
sandbox,
basis.
right? If we're going to have the sandbox analogy, you're basically we're having a conversation about my sandbox, and you won't have the conversation without taking your shovel and throwing sand all over my
I already
sandbox.
addressed yours to the hill. You in your own sandbox.
By
You
asserting
stay in your
yours.
own sandbox, and you stay in there.
You did not get out of it without asserting yours. So
I did not. I addressed yours, and I also gave you my sandbox.
how does it address?
I already addressed yours within yours.
How does it
Already
assert?
have a
How do you do that without asserting?
I didn't apply mine to yours. I merely met you on your own ground. You jumped ship. You said, I don't have an answer to that.
Where?
When I asked you to explain, you have the thing generating its own negation.
No, I did answer that. I said, when
No,
you
you
have
did
things
not.
moving around,
You said
constantly
it did
changing,
that.
that
That's what
eventually
you
it
said.
creates order.
Yeah, you just merely asserted it. You didn't explain it to people.
Which is why I was bringing in the dice example, which is when you asserted your beliefs over mine.
And I'm saying, how do you have
Well, I'd like to know
order? You're
how
just
do you know
saying
it's
that's just a chaotic result. There's no order coming from that. It's still chaos at the end result.
Do the dice not stop?
How do you have stopping?
The dice would land.
How do you have landing?
It's the constant moving of things, and then finally it stops.
How do you have the causation in between?
The order
the
happens
throwing
and
of the
creation
dice?
takes place.
How do you have
That would
causation?
be-
How do you have causation? Is causation?
I don't know.
Rational or is it?
But here's what I will
is
say.
it order or disorder?
Is that
Causation.
earlier in this conversation, I admitted that ultimately this is a provisional belief that is ultimately an assertion. And if we can agree on that, then we can move on. That this doesn't necessarily.
Okay, it's
right,
your
it is.
guess.
Yes,
I
that's exactly
agree.
what it is. It's a guess.
Yeah, it's your gas. So I'm going to press your gas to its hilt. Are you prepared to do that?
I don't know all the answers.
Back to the dice analogy. They land, and they stop. They land, and then it's because they were thrown that there's the causation there. How do you even get causation from your worldview?
Where's the causation in the analogy? Which part are you asking about? The throwing or the landing?
Is that chaos or order from your paradigm?
I like to know how
order would be the dice stopping.
we can even apply this to minds. You know, if chaos created order within logic. However, we're going to have a problem because then how do we know who's logical and who's not?
Well, how do you get stopping being the order?
Stopping with structure. Like clearly with the universe, there's more things. It's more than just a dice roll, right?
So it was non-structural.
You have a kind of a big bang happening and then kind of a universe forming. There's a lot of things taking place there. And what Matt said was that if it wasn't personal, all of it would be instantaneous. Which
is
I
a
agree
snapshot. If you took a picture of the snapshot of the dice being thrown, 50% of the way through the dice being thrown, is that rational?
You could probably extrapolate order out of a frozen moment. Sure.
Is that order? Is it?
You could. That's what I said. You could extrapolate order out of a frozen moment.
So it's order throughout the chain, which you're saying random chaos, but that's where you're contradicting yourself all the way over. You're saying, oh yeah, you can call that order. No, you're saying that's disorder. It doesn't become order until it stops, right? That was your original assertion. Now you're backtracking.
In the dice analogy, there's multiple. Like if you stop the dice in
the
another
dice
way,
analogy,
which is what you would be doing if you took a picture.
Encapsulates the snapshot between at any point. We can stop at 30%, 50% of the dice being thrown, 70%, 80%, 85, 85, 2%, whatever degree you want to go to. You already affirmed that even at 50%, that's order.
I think that what's going on is that you're inserting intentionality into the example.
No,
which is what taking the picture.
I just asked you to answer honestly. You said that would be
right,
and
I'm examining it now. Are you not willing to engage that? So, upon examination of the example, the taking of a snapshot would be inserting intentionality into it, which means it's not the dice stopping; it's you stopping the moment and you capturing the
causal relationship,
which inserts intentionality.
No, I
So
didn't say
you would be able to
intentionality.
extrapolate order from you
I'm
freezing
just
the moment, but
stressing
that's inserting intentionality.
I didn't say intentionality. I said cause.
You were talking about somebody else taking a snapshot. Otherwise,
I
there's no
said
snapshot to
that
extrapolate
the
order from.
point in time in sequence, because you would affirm time and sequence of events, causation. That's the issue.
I wouldn't think that
I
would apply to
represent that
chaos.
by someone taking a snapshot. I'm saying you have ontologically a physical substance moving in space and time at a particular time in space. Right?
Would there be time and space in a non-universe?
You say it stops by the laws of physics, but it's being thrown, and there's an ontological status of that in time, and you're saying time is chaos, but it's following a causal
I didn't say time was chaos.
relationship, which is really chaos.
I've tried to say the opposite, I think,
but
twice.
it's non-chaos. Is it really non-chaos?
Where are you?
While the dice are being thrown?
Start over, dude. Like, you're going in 7 different directions now.
No, I'm staying right. The dice are being thrown. That's all I'm
Right.
focusing on. This is not hard.
You've said about 7 different things about the dice, talking about where they are, where they're
Based
throwing, where
upon
you're stopping, why they're
what
stopping,
beforehand.
what's going on. What's your example?
I'm talking about we went and you said the order is when it stops.
Right.
Verbatim.
Sure.
You're saying it's chaos beforehand. I say,
Yes.
oh, really? That's
The throwing of the dice with the introduction.
Let's
of
go
chaos.
back to the chain here. Let's see if it's chaos. You already affirmed it's not chaos.
How?
Well, you just already affirmed. I
True.
brought the analogy of the snapshot.
Right.
And
I've said
you
4
are already
times.
assuming
This is number,
causation.
Matt, this is number 4, that taking the snapshot is introducing intentionality into the example.
You already have it ontologically. Whether or not a person's taking a snapshot camera of it, I'm saying you even believe in the time delineation of causal elements of the dice being thrown by a person. I would assume that you're saying intentionality from that point. Well, okay, fine. But I'm saying you view it as abstractly here as a snapshot. This is the point.
So you're just talking about trying to freeze
causality.
I don't know how you would freeze a moment in a world without time. So I don't think that chaos has time. So
is there a sequence of time?
Pardon?
Did it go through a sequence?
Matt was saying earlier that it would have to be instantaneous, which I agree with.
No, because you said they land.
In the analogy, yes.
No, they haven't landed yet.
The only thing the analogy is supposed to do is so the introduction of chaos and the chaos leading to order. Now, if you take that and you want to take the analogy and try to apply it to the actual concept, let me finish. If you take that analogy and you want to try it to the actual concept, it would be something that would be happening instantaneously of the dice being thrown and landing.
In Ocean, you're calling it chaos because, now affirm to me if whether or not this is true or not. You're defining it as chaos because you are ignorant of all external factors, correct?
What do you mean?
You are ignorant of all external factors, the rotation of the Earth, wind speed, etc., when the dice are thrown. Whole host of other factors come into that. When the dice leave the hands, the force that is actually thrown with them and the distance and the physics upon that, taking the whole host of all physics together, you're ignorant of that. You're going to call that chaos because you are ignorant of.
Right. In the case of the dice being thrown, there is the illusion of chaos rather than actual chaos. I would agree with that.
Illusion of chaos, but not really.
But that's why it's an analogy and not like a direct.
Look, if you're just saying you're going to use an analogy and then where the analogy breaks down, but that's the very basis of what you're trying to assert.
You're taking aspects of
order comes from chaos
are not part of the idea of the example.
Or is this just subsurface?
Obviously, I can't. Otherwise, the only thing that I can do in order to provide an analogy is just use the concept. But the analogy is attempting to explain the concept.
Your analogy
should
be...
Sure, there's always problems with analogies. We said this earlier. There's problems with every analogy, and we can examine an analogy and see where it coheres and where it doesn't cohere. But In the case of where you're introducing, where it's like, yes, the
analogy
is about the illusion of chaos rather than the actual concept of chaos.
No.
I'll agree with you.
Ocean, analogies can break down at multifacets outside of its core, but the purpose of analogy is to illustrate the principle. If your analogy breaks down at the principle, then it's a false analogy. It's not even parallel. Now,
so the concept of chaos, literal,
analogies, they break
would
out
be
at the
analogous
branches,
to
but
the
the
illusion
root
of
stays
chaos
the
in this
same.
example. So the illusion would be what is being represented.
So
Do you understand that?
illusionary?
Oh my God.
Let me put it this
All
way.
right, it seems like you were talking over the important part. So let me do this again.
No, the basis is the core. It's the analogy break down at the branches, but not at the trunk. The trunk is supposed to be what's conveyed in an analogy, not the branches. That's where we, the branches can be trimmed.
The trunk of this is throw versus land. All right, that's what the dice throw analogy
that's
is.
where you falter.
It's using the illusion of chaos to cohere with the concept of chaos in the example.
All right, I'm going to let Tyler take over. Tyler wants to say some things or ask some questions, but thanks for the conversation.
Sure.
Much better than realistic nihilist. Go, Tyler.
I just had a couple of questions because I only have a couple minutes and then I'm going to bed actually. But when I first came on, you were saying, Ocean, that because I'm trying to even understand the metaphysic. You were saying that chaos.
I'm going to say that I don't necessarily understand the metaphysic of this. So
well, I'm even trying to just grab a grasp generally on what it is. So
sure.
You were saying that chaos. I know there's no time before. I know we're not talking about actual time, but just logical order, I guess. You have chaos. Out of chaos came order, which came the. Do you hold to like a pantheon of gods? Is that like?
Yeah, I'm a polytheist.
Well,
and this is just a provisional belief, so it's not something that I necessarily am.
Well, I actually think you're a henotheist because you do hold that there's one supreme God, right? Is what you said?
Well, then any religion with a supreme God would be
henotheism.
I don't think that. So I think what henotheism is basically right. No, henotheism is essentially like if you believe in an ultimate God, and then the rest of them you don't necessarily worship. It's kind of like as I've never seen henotheism represented from polytheism. Because I see, like, within the mythology, there is Odin, which is considered the All-Father and the King of Gods. So whether or not you want to consider that henotheism is going to be, if you want to take your point of view and try to apply it there, fine. But then, Greek polytheism is also henotheism, and so is Hinduism. That's henotheism because of Brahman. Hinduism, you might have a point because that's like one ultimate God in that case.
Ocean, would monolatry fit your position better?
Would say what?
That fit your position
Modalism?
better instead of henotheism.
I'm not hearing you. You're dropping out every once in a while.
Monolatry worship. So, do you know that position?
Monolart?
I'll talk in the side chat.
Look at this. Look at this. The worship of one God without the denial of existence. No, that doesn't, because I worship more than one God.
So I'm just trying to get the order first, and then I have some follow-up questions. So you have the pantheon of gods, polytheism. Out of that comes material creation somehow, Big Bang, whatever, and then here we are, right? Is that just kind of the rough order of it?
I've seen two different explanations of it, and I don't really hold to either one because either one really works. Is that either the gods came out of chaos or the universe came out of chaos, or the universe and the gods came out of chaos? Is multiple ways of playing it.
Okay.
But either way, if you have gods, they would have to come out of chaos. This idea,
You've also said that within chaos, there's not any. It's chaos. There's no laws of logic. There's no order whatsoever.
Sure, that would be the idea.
So I think,
which is hard to fight against with logic, right? Because it's trying to disobey.
Well, no. Well, I mean, I think two observations is that one of them is I think that's where your dice analogy is going to break down.
Is the lack of logic and chaos thing?
Well, yeah, because dice aren't chaos. I mean, they're not chaotic.
I mean, the dice
they're
thing is an
probabilistic.
analogy. The analogy is imperfect. I'm admitting that. I've been
Well,
trying to admit that, but people aren't letting me admit
Yeah,
that.
I think Matt's point is that it's not imperfect. That at the point where the analogy is supposed to work, it's actually fundamentally disanalogous. I think is his point. So maybe you can come up with a different analogy, but the dice one might not work for you.
What is the fundamental spot? Are you talking about with the?
Yeah, because
the only thing I was trying to explain with that analogy was how order can come from chaos, with the throwing of the dice being the introduction of chaos and the landing of the dice being ordered out of chaos.
Yeah, but it had just to answer
But dice,
question.
but that's the thing is that dice aren't chaotic. So order doesn't come out of chaos with dice. That's the thing is that
You
that,
agree
that
that the illusion of
fundamental
chaos
thing-
comes with dice, and that's like where gambling is based. Is that there's the illusion of chaos there?
Oh, that's the thing.
It's not chaos though. It's improbability. That's two different concepts.
It's ignorance of all factors.
Yeah, it's a
From a
conflation
human
of
perspective.
it's a conflation of epistemology.
I
and
might agree with that as far as the being a bad analogy.
That's why I pressed that
actually being
point.
an improbability.
Yeah. So, but my question is if there's no logic within chaos, I'm not sure we can even have a reasonable I'm not sure we can have a reasonable conversation about it.
I agree with that.
So my question then is that how can it be a reasonable starting point for anything? Because no matter what you say, I can negate it. And it could be just, and it's equally true.
It could be
right?
just as true,
Say, or you could say order came out of chaos, and I could say, well, order didn't come out of chaos. And we're both right.
Sure, I could see that.
I could say my very words are deity, are deified.
I don't think that it's a good starting place. I think it's what chaos is to me is a more or less a provisional conclusion. It's not a starting point.
So that's my question then is that, so normally we're going to say, well, you want a conclusion, right? Because clearly it's not empirical, right? You're not appealing to any empirical evidence to get there. Clearly it's not deductive or inductive, right? So it's got to be abductive. So I'm going to ask, what's the conclusion? What is the explanatory value of chaos? That's not better explained on other on other worldviews. Like what does appeal to chaos get you explanatorily?
I don't necessarily think that it does.
Because I could use that use that as an explanation for anything.
Conversation within polytheism because it's something that you're right. It doesn't necessarily have explanatory power other than describe something that could be the source of the gods, right? Or could be the source of whatever universe exists. But in some polytheistic traditions, they abandon the idea of chaos, and there's actually a creator deity like Christianity.
Right. So, but that's my question. So you said it's a conclusion, and I'll get to that in a second. But one of the benefits.
And one that may not be
provisional conclusion. I mean, I'm going to ask a conclusion of what? Like, what's the argument that gets you there? But before we go
you missed
there,
the earlier part of this conversation.
I did. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It was full. I came in late. So sorry. We don't have to go back to it. I'll listen to the recording. For my own edification.
Matt chases me over to it like pretty quickly. A lot of Christians do. I don't because it's kind of frustrating because I don't think a lot of the valuable things in paganism aren't the concept of chaos. There's other things that are more interesting to talk about that aren't there. This is kind of a ancient philosophy solution to the prime mover idea.
But it's not. But that's the other problem is that it's not a solution.
May or may not be right. No, I agree.
Because in order to say that chaos is equivalent, functionally to a prime mover within the system, right? You'd have to be able to say something consistent about it, but you can't say anything consistent about chaos because there's no laws of logic. So
what do you do in a situation in which there isn't something consistent about the prime mover? Like it's maybe,
well, and can I ask something?
That's the question. That's kind of the point I'm getting at is at what point do you just say, oh, there's nothing logically consistent or coherent about this? Not just that there's a limitation of my knowledge about it, so I can't be consistent, or I just am personally ignorant of something, so I just don't have a good explanation. Mm-hmm. But actually, fundamentally, it must be inconsistent because of what the explanation is. It by it's weird to say by necessity because we're talking about something that can't be
right.
logical, so it can't be necessary or non-necessary or contingent or non-contingent.
And that's one of the ways it squeezes out of a lot of these conversations. Is that like it doesn't.
Well, it squeezes out
much that you can get out of. You can't really get much explanatory out of it, but you also it's difficult to defeat because it gets out of logic, which is part of the problem. But that's just the origin of logic. So
that's just it. That is what makes it defeasible. That'd be like me saying I'm a married bachelor, and you say, "Well, why are you a married bachelor?" And I said, "Well, because yellow smells like crayons."
Right.
Illogical is chaos. I just want to remember that. Well,
it's not illogical. It's illogical. Is his point.
So it doesn't have a logic attached to it or not.
Yeah, it's irrelevant to try because there's no logical laws of it. So that's why I was saying like if you said, well, you know, why are you married to your wife? And I said, it's because I'm a married bachelor. And you said, well, that doesn't make any sense. And I said, yeah, it does because crayons smell like yellow.
So it's kind of like amoral.
It's not an explanation, right? That just
it has like amoral.
Yeah, like
it's
amoral.
over here.
Hold on, with that in mind, okay. So this illogical thing, gods came out of that, is what you're saying, right? I just don't want to misrepresent you.
Right.
That's the thing is they can't come out of it.
I know.
Because in order to come out of it, it has to have there has to be some type of static reality about it in order for something to be derived from it.
It may make
because I could say that's derived from it and they're not derived from it. It creates and it doesn't create.
I just want to make sure if I heard it correctly from Ocean and his view that the illogical, that these other deities come out from illogical means, right? Ocean.
I'm toying with the concept right now. It's just kind of playing with it because Tyler's kind of going in a direction that I don't often like.
I'm just asking. I'm honestly,
and everybody just jumps ship. So
I'm not saying you're jumping ship.
No. He's saying we would normally jump ship by now.
He's saying people generally jump ship.
Yeah. Well, and I think, and Ocean, I'm trying to answer on. Sorry if I'm answering on your behalf.
I'm attempting to respond to you, and then I keep getting interrupted by.
No. I'm actually. I'm trying to answer to clarify. I think even if Ocean, you correct me if I'm wrong, even if Ocean believes that chaos was the prime reality, I think like if I was in Ocean's shoes, I think the answer would be your question is a meaningless question, right? Because you're still asking logical constraints about it.
I'll show you what I'm trying to get at.
Are you trying to get to amorality from illogical through the creation of the gods to something that's illogical?
No, I think there's another consequence to this that's being overlooked.
What is that?
Well, I have to make sure I'm not misrepresenting you first, because then I'm not even going to bother to say.
Well, let's tell me where you're going, and we can assume the properties are true until we get to the conclusion.
If you are saying that deities come from illogical, I got to ask you one more question, and then I'll tell you.
Sure.
Okay? Would you say that my words you can't know if my argument against your views are logical or illogical? Would you say that?
Say that again.
You wouldn't be able to. My logic, as far as you're concerned, or my words against your polytheism would be illogical in one sense, right? You could
only when applied to the concept of chaos, because that's the only place where I would be putting forth the idea that logic doesn't apply here. Which may be party foul. I'm look through this conversation. I'm looking at it, and it could be a party foul that this is going on.
Here's the thing: you just deified me at that point. You deified my own thoughts and my own words.
Only if I don't see the universe as a deity. And I also don't think the deities are the only thing that can come out of chaos.
To escape this, you would have to say that my words against you are appealing to logic and order.
Your words do appeal to logic. Sure.
Yeah, but does that mean it? But then the question becomes: does that mean it's logical in your mind, or if it's logical or illogical according to your belief? what I'm saying. Because I know you don't want to say that my arguments against your polytheism is logical, because then you would have to accept my logic.
I think that in order to have a meaningful conversation about this kind of stuff, you have to appeal to logic, which is the reason why the chaos conversation breaks down once you say.
Yeah, but no, what I'm saying is you wouldn't want to say, Oceans, that my arguments against you are logical, otherwise you'd be agreeing with me. But we don't agree, right?
Depends on what your argument that you're using is. You might be using something that's fallacious, and I don't know. You haven't put forward an argument as far as I can tell.
Well, anybody's arguments here.
I'm not going to say that your argument is logical when you haven't said something.
Anybody's arguments here, would you say were they logical or illogical? Or would you say you just don't know?
You have to provide an example. Because there were a lot of things said over the course of the past 20, 30 minutes, hour.
The arguments used to refute your position by Matt and Tyler, at this point, are you able to say that they're either logical, illogical, or illogical?
I think I've asked for a specific example 3 times now. You haven't done so.
My specific.
I don't know what to do with this.
Nate, can I try here?
Go ahead.
So Ocean, when you're if you were asking me if this role was switched, right? If we were on different sides and I was the one that my views were being examined and I was in a room full of I was gonna say atheists, but polytheists, I guess.
Right.
And I said, well, the definition of God is that he can, the definition of omnipotence, because this is sometimes floated around, is that God can do anything.
Sure.
Historically, it's God can do any logically possible thing. God can do whatever he desires, right? So, but imagine I said, well, God can do anything. And then you and the other people in the group proceeded to show that there were logical contradictions within the Bible, logical contradictions within the nature of God between the omni attributes, for example. And let's, for the sake of argument, just say that you were able to demonstrate it, right? I don't actually think there are good arguments to that effect.
There's one of the issues with Christianity, as far as I'm concerned. So sure.
Okay, I mean, I don't think any of those are valid, but let's just, for the sake of argument, say that they are. Imagine I then said, well, I see your point. And we can only talk about things logically, but God's not subject to logic.
Sure.
So thanks for your argument, but God can do that. God can, whatever that contradiction is, God can make that contradiction true.
That would be a truly omnipotent God, I think. But yeah, so
I mean, I think it'd be an incoherent concept, but
that's kind of the thing, is that chaos would be an incoherent concept.
But
when you start squeezing it out of logic, you enter the stage of incoherence.
But
at which point the conversation breaks down.
Yeah, but notice you just said you think that is part of the problem with Christianity, right?
What do you mean?
You think that part of the problem with Christianity is that it entails a concept that is internally inconsistent.
What if I told you I was God?
Omni-cooperation.
Wait, Nate, hold on.
Yeah.
So Ocean, I mean, you just said that part of your rejection in Christianity is based on the fact that you think there are arguments that show that there are incoherencies and contradictions within the concepts that we hold to. Right? That's what you just said. But then on the other hand, you're willing to say
I think you're hijacking a couple of things that I've said and associating them with each other when I didn't do it. So
well, no, I think you didn't you just say that, because when I said, well, I'll grant it, and you said, well, I think those arguments exist. You said that's one of my major problems with Christianity. I mean, I think that's pretty verbatim of what you just said.
Omni-cooperation, not the just all-powerful by itself. But sure.
Yes, but the point, I mean, but okay, so let me ask it a different way. Why do you reject Christianity?
Inconsistencies in the claim itself.
So you reject it because there's inconsistencies within its claims.
So they're chaotic inconsistencies? Then they become deified by definition.
Yeah. So why is it that our even if I grant that those inconsistencies are there for the sake of argument,
Sure.
Why is it that that's a problem when it comes to Christianity? When there's an inconsistency on, let's say, I don't mean peripherals as in they're minor, but peripherals in the sense that they are not the ground of all being within our worldview, right? Inconsistencies on concepts of the atonement or inconsistencies within concepts of inerrancy or whatever, right? Why are inconsistencies on peripherals? Why are inconsistencies in the branches a reason to reject it? But logical inconsistencies and logical incoherence of a fundamental level within your worldview, I mean, at the metaphysical grounding level, why is that not a problem for your worldview? Isn't that much more important to have a coherent?
If the Christian was embracing the lack of logic in the omnis, then I wouldn't have too much of a problem at that point. It's just saying that God escapes logic in such and such way, at which point it's sort of incoherent at that point, but not incoherent to the point of being able to reject it simply because it's matching the claims in an incoherence.
So
that's what chaos kind of does, and also chaos is kind of a peripheral idea that can be rejected or accepted. This is not something that all polytheists agree on. This is something that's actually fairly rare among polytheists, and it's something that I will hold as a provisional idea that can be accepted or rejected. So I don't think that it's a concept that is worth accepting or rejecting the rest of the religion on by itself, because this is not something that's found in any texts. This is a philosophical idea that's basically playing around.
At that point, you just said, as long as we're cool with the inconsistencies, then that's okay. But if we try to defend them that they're not inconsistencies, then that's a problem.
Embracing inconsistency makes it so that okay, that's what you believe.
So if we were just to man up and own it and say,
because there's not really any way to do so.
Right? So if we were just to man up and just say, yeah, there's logical inconsistencies in the nature of God, you would be much more willing to accept Christianity as true, or as viable.
So
no, I'm just saying. I'm not saying that you would.
Viable is a different conversation. So
I'm not saying that you. I'm not saying you would, because you might have better alternative. I'm saying it would become more viable to you than it was previously if we just say. So
okay, yes, it would. So if Christians were going around saying these are our beliefs and the universe is absurd, then I would have a lot more respect for Christianity as a result.
So I guess at that point, I'm just going to say, with as much love and respect as I can have, I'm not sure that we can have a reasonable conversation then, because in order to defend your provisional view, right? And I grant that you're saying it's a provisional view, it's not your actual view. But in order to defend a provisional view, you've actually talked yourself into a corner where the less logical and coherent something is, the more likely you are to respect and accept it. And the more logically rigorous and coherent something is, the less likely you are to accept it. I'm not sure at that point that we can have a reasonable conversation.
The latter of those two options is not something that I will agree to. I'll agree to the first, but not the latter.
The latter is just the logical correlate of the first. If something is more incoherent, if something becomes more incoherent, it becomes more plausible. That means at the point that it was less coherent, it becomes the fact that it was less incoherent, that is, then more coherent, it was less plausible. It's just a logical correlate. You're moving up and down on an XY axis. You can't affirm the one and not affirm the other.
I don't see why you can't hold both positions.
Ocean, are Tyler's arguments making logical sense to you?
There's a disagreement we're having, in case you didn't notice.
Oh, okay. Well, they are. Well, then how do you know if the chaos or the illogic in his words haven't then just become deified out of that chaos within his logic?
What is this thing you've got with deification?
Because chaos, out of the chaos came your gods, came the order. How do you know Tyler's order didn't just come now, later, out of the disorder in his words?
Why would that matter for deification?
Huh?
Why would that matter for deification?
I'm just going with what the standard you apply.
I don't follow. How are you getting deification?
Maybe not deification. Let's just go with order in general. if order is given out
Yeah,
of
logic is orderly. It's fine. I think that you're. I don't know. I'm trying to.
if order comes out of chaos,
because we're in it.
then
Me and Tyler are in the middle of something, I think, and you're trying to apply stuff.
You're
I'm not
running-
sure if you understand the
you're
concept we were
running.
talking about earlier.
you are running.
No.
Run. I mean, but dude, it's still.
I'm
it's
attempting to
still
have the
a valid
conversation
thing.
that we're in the middle of with Tyler.
All right.
Is that fair? Because you're
Uh,
essentially interrupting right now.
No, it's fair because the question applies to what Tyler's been trying to tell you.
But you're inserting deification in a way that doesn't make sense to me.
Okay, wipe deification from your mind and go with
Okay.
logic for a minute. Okay, you and Tyler were talking about logic. Now
assuming
I have.
that his conversation, assuming that his assertions are logical, then sure.
Okay, I want to
what?
go with what you said though. You said order comes out of chaos, right?
Sure.
Okay.
We're in a universe that is order, right? So
Fine.
anything that's in here is going to be
Fine.
order.
Okay.
Okay.
Order assumes logic, right? Order assumes logic, like you said. Therefore, if my statements appeared illogical to you, you don't know 5 seconds from now, all of a sudden they become logical, and you have to accept them. That's what I'm saying. You would
What?
have to concede to that.
What'd you say?
If the illogic, when you say Tyler's statements are illogical, you don't know 5 seconds from now they just became logical out of the chaos of its own illogic. That's what you're going to have a real hard time doing.
I have no idea what you're saying.
Hey, Ocean, can you see my screen? This is I just quickly drew a graph. Can you
Okay.
see it? So
Yeah.
this is what I'm saying. You can't accept one and deny the other, because in accepting one, the other one is just the logical correlate. So we have just a simple XY axis, right? So what you said is that the more that we admit the incoherence, right, the more that we go along the x-axis, the more plausible it becomes to you, right? It doesn't mean that you're going to accept it, because you might have better alternatives, but you're going to say it's more plausible the more that we admit the incoherence. So as we admit incoherence, it becomes more plausible.
I think
So
you're
at any moment in the graph, the less coherent something is, the less plausible something is to you.
I think that you're taking the statement of at least you're embracing the incoherence as something that is then a standard, which I don't think it would be a standard.
But what if 5 seconds from now it just became a standard and now you're forced to accept it?
Now you're just taking an ever-changing logical
I'm
approach.
saying that's what happens according to your worldview. It would have to come, the order would have to come out of the illogic of Tyler's words. Therefore, you would then have to have no choice but to accept it as you accept the order of the gods and worship them out of the chaos of the universe.
That doesn't follow.
Well,
We're inside
5
the
seconds
universe.
from now
There's-
it will, probably.
This universe is logical.
And to be fair, I don't think Ocean is saying that we are living in the chaos.
Right. I think that's the problem with what you're stating.
No, what I'm saying is, if my words are illogical and they don't make sense, if Tyler's words are illogical and don't make sense, they're just chaotic. 5 seconds from now, they're going to become orderly, possibly. They would have to, because you're applying that order is going to come out of chaos.
No, I think to be fair to Ocean, he's not saying that chaos is still coextensive with reality.
Okay, define coextensive now.
It's not that we're
not
and Ocean,
still
you can correct
swirling
me
in
if I'm-
chaos.
yeah. So
Yeah, you're on the right track, Tyler.
Wait,
Yeah,
hold on. Repeat it.
Like,
You guys
if
keep
you
talking
assume the
over me.
concept of chaos, which again, I think, honestly, what I will say is in this conversation, we have found problems with chaos. And it has to do with the applying of logic to it, whether or not you would apply logic to it.
Do
And
you
there are
still
things that
hold
follow
to
from that are
logic?
problems.
Logic and order, which assume each other, coming out of disorder and illogic. Do you
You're one of-
still
Nate
hold
is one of the few people that has interrupted me when I'm admitting defeat to somebody.
Yeah, I
am attempting to
you
toss
need to
Tyler here a
listen to what
bone,
Ocean's
and you
saying
just
here.
you're trying to sit there and go like, wait, but before you finish admitting that there's a problem with what you've been espousing, let me put forward something else. No, wait, let me give Tyler a bone for a second.
It wasn't sounding like you were giving up your polytheism at that point, though.
No, I'm not giving up the polytheism.
He's not giving up his polytheism. He's giving
exactly,
up the
but
he's
what
not
I'm
even giving
saying
up the concept of chaos. He's just saying it was a provisional belief, and he's seeing that there's holes with it.
Well,
Right.
how does this?
Which I think
how
that
does
Tyler's
this
pointed
order of
out.
chaos connect to polytheism?
Well, you have to sit back and listen.
Okay, Joshua, I'm going to do that right now, and I'm going to give Ocean the chance to explain to me how chaos is connected to the polytheists.
It's an attempted explanation for the source of reality in the gods.
Okay.
But it's in a situation in which there's only a couple of religions, as far as polytheistic religions in general, that
So
describe
illogic gives.
Hold on, Nate.
proof
Now you just said
if
that
I'm.
you would. Hold on, buddy. You just said that you to me.
Okay. I'm sorry,
you would
Josh.
give up-
Nate, you're kind of jumpy, man.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, so what the idea of chaos is supposed to do within polytheism is it uses Greek mythology to try and explain the creation account.
Okay.
As far as, because a lot of polytheistic traditions, due to a number of reasons, specifically with the Norse, it has to do with Christianity coming in and kind of wiping out a lot of writings. So thanks, guys. But
You're welcome.
You're actually welcome for that.
With the Greeks, the Greeks have a creation account that is preserved.
Okay.
Through the Romans. So what
Yes.
what the attempt is with a lot of with polytheistic ideas is to take that concept and see how it would work with other religions or with the creation account in general, and maybe apply it to the Kalam. And it's a conversation that's been a point of interest for polytheists for some time. With the recent revival of polytheism over the past 50 years.
It's a clarify. I just have a clarifying question.
Sure.
When you talk about like the myths of like the Greek myths and stuff like that, just so I understand what you're conceptualizing, do you think that the myths are true in the way that they're stated, or do you think that they're myths of deeper reality? So do you think, for example,
I use the word myth to avoid having a truth application or a falsehood application. When I'm saying myth in this context, I'm meaning story.
Right, but what I'm asking is, do you think that those stories, like when in the biblical account, we're going to say, okay, well, Noah's not just a parable of something. Noah was a real guy.
You're a believer in the worldwide flood?
That's a different question.
Out of curiosity, are you?
I am, and he would say no. But
yeah, I'm going to say it's a localized flood, but but
either way, Tyler believes like myself that he was a real guy.
Noah was a real guy, right? It's not just parable. So I mean, I want you to keep going.
I think it could be a parable based on truth. Like if you want to take the Noah's account, if you want to take the Noah's flood account as an example, I think that there could be a bit of truth to it in that it was a localized flood. I don't know that it would be a giant boat full of animals. I think that it's likely that the real story of the real Noah could be in a guy in a canoe with his cat and his family.
No, but what I think Tyler's saying, Ocean.
But that would make it aspects of the story being true rather than
Ocean.
It's a complete falsehood.
The flood's a tangent.
I'm trying to provide an example as far as what we're talking about with myth. I'm not trying to say anything.
I think Josh was getting where I was going. Josh, you understand where I was going, right?
Yes, sir. What I think Tyler's saying, no, and what I'm asking as well is it these myths? Is it a way to describe maybe hidden lost truths or deeper realities or stories to express what certain communities or multiple communities believe is true about these gods, these deities?
There is a myriad of stories in among the Norse, and some of them I might say are parables, and others I might say are truths. And I think that some Christians look at the Bible the same way.
Why
Hey,
do you?
I gotta go to bed, guys. But
Okay.
Ocean is good talking with you, man.
Yeah, sure thing.
All right,
We'll talk
God
later.
bless.
And hope I see you around again in these rooms. It's interesting.
Absolutely. If you want to shoot me a message on Hangouts, we'll definitely talk later.
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds good. All right, night.
Night. Why, Ocean, do you believe that they are true? Polytheism, and how does it connect with the logical coming from the illogical? I know you want to say it's an explanation.
Sure.
Okay, but how did you get there?
I think that a lot of beliefs about scriptures, as far as the truthfulness of them, is a matter of faith. And I think that that's something that pagans and Christians might agree on.
Is the principle that the illogical can create deity, or chaos can create deity?
You're stuck on chaos now, aren't you?
Yeah, I don't.
Is hold on.
Because the answer to that is going to be, I don't know.
You don't bridge the gap. Well, then why did you bring it up? That chaos.
Because it's a concept that is discussed among pagans. It's something
But
that
why
I
do you
provisionally
go with
hold
the
to. From
concept?
a lot of us.
Earlier, Nate, because I left for a couple of reasons, but wanted to give room, and so I was doing other things. I kind of listened here and there, but I did remember Ocean saying that the chaos, and I don't want to misquote you, Ocean. I was saying theory or the chaos of the paganism or polytheism, I should say, is only a part of it, an aspect. And didn't you say something like maybe a small aspect of it?
It's something that can be completely removed without any harm.
Right. So that's why I think Ocean's
Chaos.
saying, yeah, that
Chaos is only the aspect of chaos?
The chaos can be like the chaos belief that we've been talking about for a while is something that can be completely removed from polytheism without any harm to the belief system.
Well, hold on. Do you accept the chaos belief?
I'm not sure, actually. This conversation's been interesting. I'm going to have to revisit it and see what some of the other answers are to it and some other thoughts about it. Because clearly the idea of saying that logic doesn't apply to chaos to try and eliminate any order from the concept has its own problems.
Well, okay. When you were defending it before you then said, okay, it's probably false. But beforehand, when you were defending it, there was a purpose for you defending it.
I think, Nate, probably the best thing.
What I'm trying to ask is, why was it brought up? What's the connection with?
Because it's an idea about the source of the gods and the universe.
Okay,
Right.
As
far as a creation account.
Can we explore that?
I think we did for quite some time.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it would probably be redundant to Ocean. I mean, that's up to him.
Well, no, because I don't understand how it creates. So you're gonna say then, Ocean, you just don't know how it creates, but that's just the way the theory puts it.
No, there's no way to verify anything about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that was the confusing part. You then seemed like you were holding to it, but then you weren't.
Yeah, I think what he's saying is
at the beginning of this conversation, I held to it. Now because of the conversation about it and some things that follow from eliminating logic from the base of it that Tyler talked about, I'm interested in re-examining it.
Consider my answer then as a freebie for you.
Let me interrupt.
Why it doesn't work.
John, are you there?
Pagan with giving paganism.
Oh, hold on, Nate.
Yeah. Hey, John, I think if you're there, I think it's about time to end the live hangout. We've been going on for a while.
End on a high note for the Christians.
Yep.
Yeah, well,
My goodness, that was a long discussion.
I agree.
That's all I'm saying. Just take it.
My brain.
Take it as a freebie. That's pretty much why I believe it cannot really substantiate. Otherwise, you would then have to deify everybody else in here if you perceive their conversations illogical and chaotic.
I think we had a conversation about deifying it. It didn't necessarily follow.
Yeah, I don't see that either.
Well,
all right, guys. Well, let's end the live. John, you want to give a quick? exit.
I don't think it deifies it objectively by what
Time out a second. Time out a second. How about we have Don?
Be
Wait,
quiet.
look, Nate, we can continue this after we go off air.
Okay.
Trying to wrap up the show. For crying out loud. Anyway. Google Plus and broadcasting from FEMA Region 10. Thank you very much for everyone who showed up. Matt Slick, along with the other Ocean with us, and everyone else who popped in and out. And we'll catch you later on next week. Topic I wanted to share, looks like I did. Never got around to it.
Well, we'll keep the topic for next
So
week.
anyway,
How about that?
I will go ahead and end the broadcast. Come on. Oh, you got to be kidding. Why is this thing not working?
Yeah, it's welcome to the 21st century, folks.
And we're done.
Yeah, I'd be interested to talk about